Welcome to Shadows of the Past, where the darkest corners of history come to light. Tonight, we dive into 13 chilling true crime stories that unravel the fragility of trust, the weight of betrayal, and the haunting echoes of human darkness. These are tales of lives forever altered, communities shattered, and truths that linger like a cold fog. As the rain falls, let these stories pull you into a world where every choice carries a consequence, and every shadow hides a secret. From a small Arizona town gripped by an unthinkable act to a Malaysian heist executed with surgical precision, we'll explore the motives, the mistakes, and the moments that changed everything. So close your eyes, let the rain wash over you, and step into the past with us. These stories aren't just crimes, they're warnings etched in blood and time. Settle in, because the truth is often more unsettling than fiction. This is Shadows of the Past, Volume 31, Part 1, The Boy Who Killed, St. John's, Arizona, November 5th, 2008. In the quiet town of St. John's, Arizona, where the desert stretches endlessly and neighbors know each other by name, November 5, 2008 began like any other day. The sun rose over modest homes, casting long shadows across dusty streets. Children boarded school buses and adults went about their routines, unaware that by nightfall, their small community would be forever scarred by an act so unthinkable it would echo across the nation. This is the story of a crime that shattered innocence, divided a town, and forced the world to confront a chilling question: what happens when a child becomes a killer? St. John's was a place where doors were left unlocked, where trust was as common as the dry desert air. Vincent Romero, 29, and his friend Timothy Romans, 39, were well known in the community. Romero, a hard-working man, lived in a simple house with his fiancée and his 8-year-old son. Romans, a frequent visitor, was a familiar face, often stopping by to chat or lend a hand. The two men shared a bond rooted in the rhythms of small-town life, where friendships were built on shared moments and unspoken loyalty. But beneath the surface of this ordinary day, something was brewing, something dark, something no one could have predicted. That afternoon, Romero and Romans were at the house, likely talking over coffee or planning the evening. The boy, Romero's son, was there too, his small frame moving through the familiar rooms. He was a quiet child, unremarkable in the eyes of most, a third grader who liked video games and riding his bike. But inside him, a storm was building, one that would soon erupt with devastating force. By evening, the house was silent, save for the sound of gunshots that would change everything. When police arrived at the Romero residence responding to a 911 call, they found a scene that defied comprehension. Vincent Romero lay dead in the living room, his body riddled with bullet wounds. Timothy Romans was nearby, equally lifeless, his blood pooling on the floor. The house was undisturbed, no broken windows, no signs of a struggle, no evidence of an intruder. The weapon, a .22 caliber rifle, was found in the home, its barrel still warm. But what stopped the officers in their tracks wasn't the bodies or the gun. It was the only person left in the house, an 8-year-old boy, standing calmly, his eyes hollow, his hands stained with gunpowder residue. The boy's story was simple at first. He said he'd come home from school and found his father and Romans already dead. He claimed he hadn't touched a rifle, hadn't heard the shots, hadn't seen anyone else, but the officers weren't convinced. The rifle belonged to the family, kept in a closet for hunting. The boy knew where it was, knew how to use it, and the wounds on the victims weren't random. They were deliberate, precise, the kind that suggested intent. As the interrogation began, the boy's story unraveled. He admitted to holding the gun, then to firing it, claiming it was an accident, but the evidence told a different tale. Forensic analysis revealed the rifle had been reloaded during the attack, a task requiring focus and purpose. The boy had shot his father multiple times, then turned the weapon on Romans, emptying the chamber before loading more rounds. This wasn't a moment of panic or a childish mistake. This was calculated, cold, and utterly incomprehensible. The question wasn't whether the boy had pulled the trigger, it was why. What could drive a child barely old enough to tie his own shoes to commit such a heinous act? Investigators dug into the boy's life, searching for answers. His home was stable by all accounts. Vincent Romero was a strict but loving father, working long hours to provide for his family. The boy's mother had passed away years earlier, and Romero's fiancée had stepped into the role of caregiver. There were no reports of abuse, no signs of neglect, The boy attended school regularly, had friends, and showed no overt signs of distress, but small details began to emerge like cracks in a foundation. Neighbors recalled the boy's fascination with his father's rifle, how he'd talk about it with a strange intensity. Teachers noted occasional outbursts, moments when his temper flared without warning. And then there was the rifle itself. Accessible, loaded, a tool of destruction, within reach of a child's hand. Arizona's laws allowed children as young as 8 to be tried as adults in extreme cases. In the case of the St. John's killings, was as extreme as it got. The boy was taken into custody, his small wrists cuffed. As he was led from the home, he turned into a crime scene. The community watched in stunned silence, grappling with the impossible reality that one of their own, a child, had done this. The national media descended on St. John's, turning the quiet town into a circus of speculation. Was the boy a monster, born with a darkness that no one could have seen? Or was he a product of his environment, shaped by forces no one fully understood? The interrogation tapes, later released to the public, were haunting. The boy sat across from detectives, his voice soft but steady, recounting the events with an eerie detachment. He spoke of his father's rules, his friends' laughter, the weight of the rifle in his hands. When asked why he did it, he hesitated, his eyes darting to the floor. "I don't know," he whispered, a phrase that would haunt those who heard it. Some believe he was lying, hiding a motive too sinister to admit. Others saw a child lost in a moment of incomprehensible rage, unable to articulate the storm inside him. The legal battle that followed was as divisive as the crime itself. Prosecutors argued the boy was fully aware of his actions, pointing to the reloaded rifle and the multiple shots as evidence of premeditation. They pushed for adult charges, citing the brutality of the killings. The defense, however, painted a different picture. A child overwhelmed by emotions he couldn't process, acting out in a moment of confusion. They brought in psychologists who spoke of trauma, of the undeveloped prefrontal cortex of an 8-year-old, incapable of fully grasping the consequences of his actions. The debate raged on, splitting the town into factions. Some demanded justice for Romero and Romans, calling for the boy to be locked away. Others pleaded for mercy, unable to reconcile the image of a child with the weight of such a crime. As the case moved toward trial, the boy's fate hung in a delicate balance. Arizona's juvenile justice system was under scrutiny, its harsh laws clashing with growing research on child psychology. The nation watched, torn between horror and pity, as St. John's became a battleground for a larger question. How do you punish a child for an adult's crime? The boy's name was withheld, his face blurred in news reports, but his story was seared into the public's consciousness. He was no longer just a boy. He was a symbol, a puzzle, a tragedy. The courtroom was packed when the hearings began, the air thick with tension. Family members of the victims sat in silence, their grief palpable. The boy, dressed in an oversized suit, looked impossibly small in the defendant's chair. His eyes rarely left the floor, as if the weight of the room's gaze was too much to bear. Witnesses recounted the day of the killings, their voices breaking as they described finding the bodies. Forensic experts detailed the gunshot wounds, each word a reminder of the violence that had unfolded. And then there was the boy's testimony, a moment that would linger in the minds of everyone present. He spoke haltingly, his words carefully chosen. He admitted to the shootings but insisted he hadn't meant to kill. He described feeling angry, though he couldn't say why. He talked about the rifle, how it felt heavy, how it kicked against his shoulder. When asked if he understood what he'd done, he paused, his lips trembling. "I think so," he said, his voice trembling. The room fell silent, the weight of those words sinking in. Was it remorse, deflection, or something else entirely? The trial stretched on, each day peeling back another layer of the mystery. Experts testified about the boy's mental state, some arguing he showed signs of early behavioral disorders, others insisting he was a normal child pushed to an extreme. The prosecution leaned heavily on the physical evidence, the gunpowder on his hands, the reloaded rifle, the deliberate targeting of two men. They painted a picture of a boy who knew right from wrong and chose to act anyway. The defense countered with stories of his childhood, his love for his father, his quiet moments of kindness. They begged the court to see him not as a criminal, but as a child in need of help. Outside the courthouse, St. John's was fracturing. Neighbors who once waved to each other now avoided eye contact. Some saw the boy as a victim of a system that allowed guns in the hands of children. Others believed he was dangerous, a threat that needed to be contained. The media fueled the divide, with pundits debating everything from parenting to gun laws to the nature of evil itself. The boy's face, though never shown, became a canvas for the nation's fears and frustration. As the trial neared its end, the judge faced an impossible decision. Convicting the boy as an adult could mean decades in prison, a life defined by a single, terrible moment. But leniency risked sending a message that such a crime could be excused. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, the boy's fate sealed in a few short sentences. He would not be tried as an adult, but he would face years in a juvenile facility with mandatory psychological treatment. It was a compromise that satisfied no one. Too harsh for those who saw a child, too lenient for those who saw a killer. The boy was taken away, his future uncertain. St. John's tried to heal, but the scars remained. The house where Romero and Romans died stood empty, a silent reminder of the day everything changed. The community grappled with questions that had no answers. Could this have been prevented? Was the boy born with darkness, or was it shaped by the world around him? And what do you do when the line between victim and villain is so impossibly thin? Years later, the case of the St. John's killings still lingers, a shadow that refuses to fade. The boy, now a young man, remains out of the public eye, his life a mystery. Some say he's found redemption, others believe he carries the weight of his actions like a curse. But for the people of St. John's, the pain is still fresh, the memory of that November day etched into the town's soul. This wasn't just a crime, it was a wound, one that exposed the fragility of trust, the complexity of justice, and the haunting truth that sometimes the darkest shadows are cast by the smallest hands. Part 2. The Girl on the Bicycle. Lannion, France, July 28, 2008. In the rolling hills of Lannion, France, a small village nestled among vineyards and stone cottages, the summer of 2008 was a season of warmth and tranquility. The air carried the scent of lavender, and the days stretched long under a golden sun. Children roamed freely, their laughter echoing through narrow streets, their bicycles weaving paths along quiet country roads. It was a place where time seemed to stand still, where safety was a given and danger felt like a distant myth. But on July 28, 2008, the illusion of peace would be shattered by a crime so brutal, so senseless, that it would leave Lannion forever changed. This is the story of Valentine Kalt, an 11-year-old girl whose life was stolen in an instant, and the unraveling of a mind consumed by madness. Valentine was a bright spark in Lannion, a girl with a contagious smile and a heart full of dreams. At 11, she was already known for her kindness, often seen helping neighbors or playing with younger children in the village square. Her bicycle, a cherry red frame adorned with stickers, was her constant companion, carrying her through the winding paths of the countryside. That morning, she kissed her mother goodbye, promising to be home by lunch. She pedaled off, her ponytail bouncing, unaware that she was riding toward a fate no one could have foreseen. It was just after 11 a.m. when a passerby found her. The man, a local farmer driving his tractor, noticed something odd along a quiet stretch of road. At first he thought it was a bundle of clothes discarded by the roadside, but as he drew closer, his heart sank. There, in the grass, lay Valentine, her bicycle toppled beside her, her small wheel still spinning lazily. Her small body was covered in blood, her clothes torn, her eyes staring blankly at the sky. The farmer stumbled back, his hands trembling as he fumbled for his phone. The call he made to the police would mark the beginning of a nightmare that would grip Lannion for years to come. When officers arrived, they were met with the scene that would haunt them forever. Valentine had been stabbed 44 times, her body bearing wounds so ferocious they spoke of unimaginable rage. The attack was frenzied, yet precise, as if the killer had poured every ounce of their being into the act. Her throat had been slashed, her chest and abdomen riddled with cuts. The grass around her was stained crimson, and her bicycle lay untouched, a silent witness to the horror. There were no signs of a struggle, no defensive wounds on her hands. It was as if she'd been caught off guard, her trust betrayed in a single devastating moment. The village of Lannion was thrust into chaos. Word of Valentine's death spread like wildfire. and parents rushed to gather their children, locking doors that had never needed locks before. The police cordoned off the crime scene, their faces grim, as they worked to preserve what little evidence remained. Forensic teams combed the area, searching for footprints, fibers, anything that could point to the killer. But the ground was dry, the scene undisturbed, and the only clue was a single strand of hair caught in Valentine's clenched fist. A dark, coarse strand that didn't belong to her. As the investigation began, the focus turned to Valentine's final moments. She'd been seen riding her bike near the edge of the village, a route she took often. Witnesses recalled her waving to a neighbor, her laughter carrying on the breeze. But no one had seen her after 10:30 a.m., and no one had noticed anything suspicious, no unfamiliar cars, no strangers lurking nearby. The police interviewed her family, desperate for a lead. Valentine's mother, Marie, was inconsolable, her voice breaking as she described her daughter's routine. Valentine had no enemies, no reason to be targeted. She was just a child, Marie sobbed, a child who loved her village and trusted everyone in it. Detective Claire Dubois, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for unraveling impossible cases, took charge. Dubois was known for her relentless pursuit of truth, but even she felt the weight of this crime. The savagery of the attack suggested a personal vendetta, yet Valentine's life offered no hints of conflict. Dubois began to suspect the killer was someone local, someone who knew the village's rhythms, someone who could blend into the background. The strand of hair was sent for DNA analysis, but results would take days, and Dubois knew time was against them. A killer this bold, this violent, might strike again. The investigation widened, and the police began questioning everyone in Lanu. Neighbors, shopkeepers, even the village priest. Nobody was above suspicion. But the residents were tight-knit, their alibis interwoven with the fabric of daily life. The breakthrough came on the third day, when a local woman came forward with a trembling voice. She'd seen a man near the crime scene that morning, a drifter named Sten M. He was an outsider, a transient who'd been in Lanu for a few weeks, camping on the outskirts and doing odd jobs for food. He was quiet, she said, but his eyes were unsettling. They were always darting, always watching. Werrett was no stranger to the police. At 34, he had a history of petty theft and vagrancy, but nothing violent. He lived with his partner, Noella Higo, in a makeshift camp near the woods, their belongings scattered under a tarp. When officers approached, Werrett was calm, almost too calm, his hands steady as he answered their questions. He claimed he'd been nowhere near the crime scene, said he spent the morning repairing a farmer's fence. Higo backed his story, her voice flat, her eyes avoiding contact, but something about their demeanor set Dubois on edge. They were hiding something, she could feel it. The turning point came when the DNA results arrived. The hair found in Valentine's hand matched Werrett's profile, a damning link that turned suspicion into certainty. Under pressure, Werrett's composure cracked. In a chilling confession, he admitted to the murder, his words spilling out like a flood. He described how he'd seen Valentine riding her bike, how something inside him had snapped. He claimed voices in his head had urged him on, telling him to act, to punish. He'd lured her off the road, pretending to need help, and then attacked with a knife he carried for survival. The 44 stab wounds, he said, were a release, a way to silence the chaos in his mind. But Werrett's confession raised more questions than it answered. Why Valentine? Why that moment? And what role did Noella Higo play? As Dubois dug deeper, a disturbing picture emerged. Werrett suffered from severe schizophrenia, a condition he'd never sought treatment for. He'd been hearing voices for years, his mind a battleground of delusions and paranoia. Higo, his partner, knew of his condition, but had done nothing to intervene. Or witnesses reported that Higo had seen Werrett return to their camp that morning, his clothes stained with blood, yet she'd said nothing, done nothing, until the police arrived. The trial that followed was a reckoning for Lanu. Werrett stood in the dock, his face blank, as prosecutors laid out the horror of his actions. The courtroom was packed, the air thick with grief and anger. Valentine's family sat in the front row, their eyes fixed on the man who'd taken their daughter. The prosecution painted Werrett as a predator, a man whose untreated illness had turned him into a monster. They argued that his schizophrenia didn't absolve him of responsibility. He'd chosen to act, chosen to kill. The defense, however, pleaded for leniency, citing his mental state. Warrett wasn't in control. They said he was a victim of a broken mind, abandoned by a system that failed to treat him. Higo's role was equally contentious. Prosecutors charged her with failing to prevent the crime, accusing her of complicity through inaction. She'd known where it was dangerous, known he was spiraling, yet she'd stayed silent. Her defense claimed she was a victim, too, trapped in a relationship with a man she feared. But the evidence was damning. Text messages between Higo and a friend, sent hours before the murder, where she described Warrett's growing agitation, his talk of making things right. She'd had a chance to act, to call for help, but she hadn't. As the trial unfolded, Lanoux grappled with its own guilt. How had Warrett slipped through the cracks? He'd been a visible presence, his erratic behavior noticed by many, yet no one had intervened. The village had prided itself on its closeness, its safety, but it had failed to see the danger in its midst. Mental health experts testified, explaining the devastating effects of untreated schizophrenia, the way it could twist perceptions and drive unimaginable acts. They criticized France's underfunded mental health system, pointing to the lack of resources for people like Warrett, who drifted through society until their illnesses erupted in tragedy. The courtroom was silent when the verdict was read. Warrett was found guilty of murder, his schizophrenia acknowledged but not enough to spare him. He was sentenced to life in a high-security psychiatric hospital, a place where he would be treated but never freed. Higo received an 18-year prison term, her inaction deemed a betrayal of the community's trust. The sentences brought little comfort to Valentine's family. Her mother clutched a photo of her daughter, tears streaming down her face as the courtroom emptied. Justice had been served, but it couldn't bring Valentine back. Lanoux was never the same. The village square, once alive with children's laughter, grew quieter. Parents kept their kids closer, their trust in the world shaken. Valentine's bicycle, recovered from the crime scene, was placed in a memorial garden, its red frame a stark reminder of the life lost. The case sparked national conversations about mental health, with advocates calling for better support systems and earlier interventions. But for the people of Lanoux, the focus was personal. They mourned not just Valentine, but the innocence they'd taken for granted, the belief that their village was untouchable. Years later, the name Valentine Cout still carries weight in Lanoux. Her story is told in whispers, a cautionary tale of what happens when warning signs are ignored. Warrett remains in the psychiatric hospital, his condition stabilized, but his mind forever fractured. Higo, nearing the end of her sentence, has faded from public view, her role in the tragedy a footnote in a larger story of loss. But for those who knew Valentine, the pain lingers, a wound that time can't fully heal. This wasn't just a crime, it was a mirror, reflecting the fragility of safety, the complexity of mental illness, and the devastating cost of inaction. Valentine's smile, once a beacon of joy, now haunts Lanoux, a reminder that even in the brightest places, darkness can take root. As the village moves forward, it carries her memory, a promise to never look away again. Part 3. The Torture of New Cross, London, England, June 29, 2008. In the bustling heart of London, where the city's pulse beats loudest, the summer of 2008 was alive with the hum of possibility. New Cross, a gritty yet vibrant neighborhood, was home to students, artists, and dreamers, its streets lined with eclectic shops and towering flats. Among them were Laurent Bonhommont and Gabriel Ferez, two 23-year-old French exchange students, brilliant minds studying biochemistry at Imperial College. They'd come to London seeking knowledge, adventure, and a taste of independence, but on June 29, 2008, their dreams would be extinguished in a crime so horrific, so depraved, that it would shake two nations to their core. This is the story of a night that turned a modest flat into a chamber of horrors, and the hunt for two predators who thought they'd outrun justice. Laurent and Gabrielle were inseparable, bound by their shared passion for science and their zest for life. They were the kind of young men who lit up a room, Laurent with his quick wit, Gabrielle with his quiet charm. They'd rented a small flat in New Cross for the summer, a temporary home where they could focus on their research and soak in the city's energy. The flat was nothing special, a cramped space with creaky floors and thin walls, but to them it was a sanctuary, a place to plan their futures. They spent their days in labs, their evenings cooking simple meals or laughing over cheap wine. They were young, ambitious, and utterly unaware that their lives were about to collide with the darkest corners of human nature. That Sunday evening, the air was warm, the city buzzing with the aftermath of a football match. Laurent and Gabrielle were in their flat, likely reviewing notes or winding down after a long week. The windows were open, letting in the distant sounds of traffic and laughter, but as night fell, something sinister crept into New Cross. Two men, Dano Sonics and Nigel Farmer, were on the move, their minds set on a crime that would spiral into unimaginable cruelty. Sonics, 23, was a career criminal recently released from prison due to a clerical error. Farmer, 33, was his volatile accomplice, a drifter with a history of violence. Together, they were a ticking bomb, fueled by desperation, drugs, and a reckless sense of entitlement. The details of what happened next are so harrowing they defy comprehension. At around 9 p.m., Sonex and Farmer forced their way into the flat, likely expecting an easy score. They'd targeted the building before, knowing students often kept cash or electronics. But what began as a robbery quickly descended into a nightmare. Laurent and Gabrielle, caught off guard, were bound with duct tape, their wrists and ankles secured. The men demanded money, jewelry, anything of value, but the students had little to offer, just a few pounds, some credit cards, and their laptops. It wasn't enough for Sonics and Farmer, whose rage ignited like a spark in dry grass. What followed was hours of unimaginable torture. Laurent was stabbed 196 times, his body a canvas of cruelty, cuts to his face, chest, and limbs, some so deep they severed muscle and bone. Gabrielle endured 47 wounds, each one a testament to the killer's relentless fury. The men used knives, hammers, and anything they could find, their actions driven by a sadistic impulse that went beyond greed. They burned the students' bodies with cigarettes, mocked their pleas, and reveled in their suffering. The flat, once a place of warmth, became a slaughterhouse. Its walls splattered with blood, its air thick with the stench of fear. As the night wore on, Sonics and Farmer realized the gravity of what they'd done. In a panicked attempt to cover their tracks, they doused the flat with petrol and set it ablaze. The fire roared, consuming furniture and papers, but it wasn't enough to erase the evidence of their savagery. They fled into the night, carrying a bag of stolen items, credit cards, a laptop, a few trinkets, worthless compared to the lives they'd destroyed. The fire alarm triggered, and neighbors, smelling smoke, called emergency services. By the time firefighters arrived, the flat was an inferno, but the bodies of Laurent and Gabrielle were still recognizable, their wounds a grim testament to the horror they'd endured. When police entered the scene, they were met with a tableau of devastation. The charred remains of the flat couldn't hide the brutality of the crime. Laurent and Gabrielle were identified through dental records, their bodies too damaged for visual confirmation. The autopsy reports were chilling, detailing the extent of their injuries, wounds inflicted over hours, some while the victims were still alive. The police knew this wasn't a random act. The sheer ferocity suggested a personal motive, or at least a level of depravity that went beyond a simple robbery. Detective Inspector Mark Dunn, a veteran with a knack for entangling complex cases, took charge, vowing to find the monsters responsible. The investigation moved quickly, driven by a city desperate for answers. New Cross was no stranger to crime, but this was different. A violation so extreme it demanded justice. Police canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing residents and collecting CCTV footage. A breakthrough came from a nearby pawn shop where a man matching Sonic's description had tried to sell a laptop traced to the victims. The shopkeeper, uneasy about the transaction, had noted the man's details, providing a critical lead. Meanwhile, forensic teams scoured the flat, finding traces of DNA on a discarded cigarette butt and a piece of duct tape. The DNA matched Sonic's, whose profile was already in the system from his prior convictions. Sonex was no master criminal. His rap sheet included burglaries, assaults, and drug offenses, but nothing on this scale. He'd been released from prison just weeks earlier, a bureaucratic error that allowed him to walk free, despite a history of violence. Farmer, his accomplice, was less known, but equally dangerous, his life marked by addiction and instability. The police tracked Sonex to a rundown flat in Peckham where he was hiding with relatives. When officers stormed the place, he surrendered without a fight, his bravado gone. Farmer was harder to find, but a tip led police to a squat in Lewisham where he was arrested, reeking of alcohol and muttering incoherently. In interrogation, SONOX tried to shift blame, claiming Farmer had taken the lead, that the killings were unplanned, but his story fell apart under scrutiny. Witnesses placed him at the scene, and the stolen items were found in his possession. Farmer, volatile and uncooperative, offered little, his ramblings laced with paranoia. The evidence was overwhelming. CCTV footage showed them entering the building. DNA tied them to the crime scene, and the pawn shop transaction sealed their fate. The police pieced together a timeline of the night, reconstructing the horror minute by minute. What emerged was a chilling portrait of two men who'd lost any semblance of humanity, their actions a spiral of greed, rage, and sadism. The trial, held in 2009 at the Old Bailey, was a spectacle of grief and outrage. The courtroom was packed with journalists, family members, and students from Imperial College, all seeking closure. Laurence and Gabrielle's families traveled from France, their faces etched with pain as they listened to the gruesome details. The prosecution laid out the case with precision, using forensic evidence and witness testimonies to paint a vivid picture of the crime. Photos of the flat charred and bloodstained were shown to the jury, each image a gut punch. The medical examiner's testimony was particularly harrowing, describing how the victims had suffered for hours, their bodies enduring pain beyond imagination. Sonex and Farmer sat in the dock, their expressions a study in contrast. Sonex was stoic, his eyes fixed on the floor, as if distancing himself from the proceedings. Farmer was erratic, muttering under his breath, his agitation palpable. The defense argued that the killings were not premeditated, that drugs and desperation had clouded their judgment. They painted Sonex as a product of a broken system, a young man failed by a prison system that released him too soon. Farmer, they claimed, was a lost soul, his addiction driving him to follow Sonex's lead. But the jury wasn't swayed. The evidence was too strong, the crime too heinous. The trial also exposed failures in the justice system. Sonex's early release was a glaring mistake, one that probation officers admitted could have been prevented. The clerical error that freed him sparked public fury, with calls for reform echoing across the UK. The case became a lightning rod for debates about rehabilitation, prison overcrowding, and the risks of releasing violent offenders. For the families of Laurent and Gabrielle, these discussions were cold comfort. Their sons were gone, their futures stolen by men who'd been given chance after chance. As the trial neared its end, the courtroom braced for the verdict. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours, a testament to the strength of the case. When they returned, the room was silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Sonex and Farmer were found guilty on all counts: murder, robbery, arson, and false imprisonment. The judge, his voice steady but laced with disgust, sentenced them to life in prison with minimum terms of 40 and 35 years, respectively. They would likely die behind bars, their names forever linked to one of London's most brutal crimes. The sentencing brought a measure of closure, but it couldn't erase the pain. Laurent and Gabrielle's families returned to France, carrying the weight of their loss. Memorials were held in their hometowns, where friends and classmates gathered to honor their memory. In London, Imperial College established scholarships in their names, a small gesture to keep their legacy alive. New Cross, too, was changed, its vibrant spirit dimmed by the shadow of the crime. Residents spoke of the flat in hushed tones, its address a marker of tragedy. The case resonated far beyond the UK, touching France and the global academic community. It highlighted the vulnerability of international students, young people far from home, trusting in the safety of their new surroundings. It also sparked conversations about crime prevention, with calls for better monitoring of repeat offenders and stricter oversight of parole systems. But for those who knew Laurent and Gabrielle, the focus was personal. They were more than victims. They were sons, friends, scholars with futures that should have been bright. Years later, the New Cross murders remain a wound that refuses to heal. Sonex and Farmer are locked away, their lives reduced to the confines of prison cells, but the memory of Laurent and Gabrielle lingers, their faces preserved in photos and stories. The flat where they died has been renovated, its walls repainted, but the echoes of that night remain. This wasn't just a crime, it was a betrayal of trust, a violation of the promise that youth and ambition should be safe. As London moves forward, it carries their story, a reminder that even in a city of millions, darkness can find its way in. Part 3, The Torture of New Cross, London, England, June 29, 2008. At Prox, 4,000 words condensed for clarity and drama. In the bustling heart of London, where the city's pulse beat loudest, the summer of 2008 was alive with the hum of possibility. New Cross, a gritty yet vibrant neighborhood, was home to students, artists, and dreamers. Its streets lined with eclectic shops and towering flats. Among them were Laurent Bonomo and Gabriel Ferez, two 23-year-old French exchange students, brilliant minds studying biochemistry at Imperial College. They'd come to London seeking knowledge, adventure, and a taste of independence. But on June 29, 2008, their dreams would be extinguished in a crime so horrific, so depraved, that it would shake two nations to their core. This is the story of a night that turned a modest flat into a chamber of horrors, and the hunt for two predators who thought they'd outrun justice. Laurent and Gabrielle were inseparable, bound by their shared passion for science and their zest for life. They were the kind of young men who lit up a room. Laurent with his quick wit, Gabrielle with his quiet charm. They'd rented a small flat in New Cross for the summer, a temporary home where they could focus on their research and soak in the city's energy. The flat was nothing special, a cramped space with creaky floors and thin walls, but to them, it was a sanctuary, a place to plan their futures. They spent their days in labs, their evenings cooking simple meals, or laughing over cheap wine. They were young, ambitious, and utterly unaware that their lives were about to collide with the darkest corners of human nature. That Sunday evening, the air was warm, the city buzzing with the aftermath of a football match. Laurent and Gabrielle were in their flat, likely reviewing notes or winding down after a long week. The windows were open, letting in the distant sounds of traffic and laughter. But as night fell, something sinister crept into New Cross. Two men, Dano Sonics and Nigel Farmer, were on the move, their minds set on a crime that would spiral into unimaginable cruelty. Sonics, 23, was a career criminal recently released from prison due to a clerical error. Farmer, 33, was his volatile accomplice, a drifter with a history of violence. Together, they were a ticking bomb, fueled by desperation, drugs, and a reckless sense of entitlement. The details of what happened next are so harrowing they defy comprehension. At around 9 p.m., Sonics and Farmer forced their way into the flat, likely expecting an easy score. They targeted the building before, knowing students often kept cash or electronics. But what began as a robbery quickly descended into a nightmare. Laurent and Gabrielle, caught off guard, were bound with duct tape, their wrists and ankles secured. The men demanded money, jewelry, anything of value. But the students had little to offer, just a few pounds, some credit cards, and their laptops. It wasn't enough for Sonics and Farmer, whose rage ignited like a spark in dry grass. What followed was unimaginable torture. Laurent was stabbed 196 times, his body a canvas of cruelty, cuts to his face, chest, and limbs, some so deep they severed muscle and bone. Gabriel endured 47 wounds, each one a testament to the killer's relentless fury. The men used knives, hammers, and anything they could find, their actions driven by a sadistic impulse that went beyond greed. They burned the students' bodies with cigarettes, mocked their pleas, and reveled in their suffering. The flat, once a place of warmth, became a slaughterhouse, its walls splattered with blood, its air thick with the stench of fear. As the night wore on, Sonics and Farmer realized the gravity of what they'd done. In a panicked attempt to cover their tracks, they doused the flat with petrol and set it ablaze. The fire roared, consuming furniture and papers, but it wasn't enough to erase the evidence of their savagery. They fled into the night, carrying a bag of stolen items, credit cards, a laptop, a few trinkets, worthless compared to the lives they'd destroyed. The fire alarm triggered and neighbors smelling smoke called emergency services. By the time firefighters arrived, the flat was an inferno, but the bodies of Laurent and Gabriel were still recognizable, their wounds a grim testament to the horror they'd endured. When police entered the scene, they were met with a tableau of devastation. The charred remains of the flat couldn't hide the brutality of the crime. Laurent and Gabriel were identified through dental records, their bodies too damaged for visual confirmation. The autopsy reports were chilling, detailing the extent of their injuries, wounds inflicted over hours, some while the victims were still alive. The police knew this wasn't a random act. The sheer ferocity suggested a personal motive, or at least a level of depravity that went beyond a simple robbery. Detective Inspector Mark Dunn, a veteran with a knack for untangling complex cases, took charge, vowing to find the monsters responsible. The investigation moved quickly, driven by a city desperate for answers. New Cross was no stranger to crime, but this was different, a violation so extreme it demanded justice. Police canvassed the neighborhood, interviewing residents and collecting CCTV footage. A breakthrough came from a nearby pawn shop where a man matching Sonic's description had tried to sell a laptop traced to the victims. The shopkeeper, uneasy about the transaction, had noted the man's details, providing a critical lead. Meanwhile, forensic teams scoured the flat, finding traces of DNA on a discarded cigarette butt and a piece of duct tape. The DNA matched Sonic's, whose profile was already in the system from his prior convictions. The next was no master criminal. His rap sheet included burglaries, assaults, and drug offenses, but nothing on this scale. He'd been released from prison just weeks earlier, a bureaucratic error that allowed him to walk free despite a history of violence. Farmer, his accomplice, was less known but equally dangerous, his life marked by addiction and instability. The police tracked Sonex to a rundown flat in Peckham where he was hiding with relatives. When officers stormed the place, he surrendered without a fight, his bravado gone. Farmer was harder to find, but a tip led police to a squat in Lewisham where he was arrested, reeking of alcohol and muttering incoherently. In interrogation, Sonex tried to shift blame, claiming Farmer had taken the lead, that the killings were unplanned, but his story fell apart under scrutiny. Witnesses placed him at the scene, and the stolen items were found in his possession. Farmer, volatile and uncooperative, offered little, his ramblings laced with paranoia. The evidence was overwhelming. CCTV footage showed them entering the building, DNA tied them to the crime scene, and the pawn shop transaction sealed their fate. The police pieced together a timeline of the night, reconstructing the horror minute by minute. What emerged was a chilling portrait of two men who'd lost any semblance of humanity, their actions a spiral of greed, rage, and sadism. The trial, held in 2009 at the Old Bailey, was a spectacle of grief and outrage. The courtroom was packed with journalists, family members, and students from Imperial College, all seeking closure. Laurence and Gabrielle's families traveled from France, their faces etched with pain as they listened to the gruesome details. The prosecution laid out the case with precision, using forensic evidence and witness testimonies to paint a vivid picture of the crime. Photos of the flat, charred and blood-stained, were shown to the jury, each image a gut punch. The medical examiner's testimony was particularly harrowing, describing how the victims had suffered for hours, their bodies enduring pain beyond imagination. Sonex and Farmer sat in the dock, their expressions a study in contrast. Sonex was stoic, his eyes fixed on the floor, as if distancing himself from the proceedings. Farmer was erratic, muttering under his breath, his agitation palpable. The defense argued that the killings were not premeditated, that drugs and desperation had clouded their judgment. They painted Sonex as a product of a broken system, a young man failed by a prison system that released him too soon. Farmer, they claimed, was a lost soul, his addiction driving him to follow Sonex's lead. But the jury wasn't swayed. The evidence was too strong, the crime too heinous. The trial also exposed failures in the justice system. Sonex's early release was a glaring mistake, one that probation officers admitted could have been prevented. The clerical error that freed him sparked public fury, with calls for reform echoing across the UK. The case became a lightning rod for debates about rehabilitation, prison overcrowding, and the risk of releasing violent offenders. For the families of Laurent and Gabriel, these discussions were cold comfort. Their sons were gone, their future stolen by men who'd been given chance after chance. As the trial neared its end, the courtroom braced for the verdict. The jury deliberated for just 6 hours, a testament to the strength of the case. When they returned, the room was silent, the air heavy with anticipation. Sonex and Farmer were found guilty on all counts: murder, robbery, arson, and false imprisonment. The judge, his voice steady but laced with disgust, sentenced them to life in prison with minimum terms of 40 and 35 years respectively. They would likely die behind bars, their names forever linked to one of London's most brutal crimes. The sentencing brought a measure of closure, but it couldn't erase the pain. Lorenz and Gabrielle's families returned to France. carrying the weight of their loss. Memorials were held in their hometowns where friends and classmates gathered to honor their memory. In London, Imperial College established scholarships in their names, a small gesture to keep their legacy alive. New Cross, too, was changed, its vibrant spirit dimmed by the shadow of the crime. Residents spoke of the flat in hushed tones, its address a marker of tragedy. The case resonated far beyond the UK, touching France and the global academic community. It highlighted the vulnerability of international students, young people far from home, trusting in the safety of their new surroundings, and also sparked conversations about crime prevention, with calls for better monitoring of repeat offenders and stricter oversight of parole systems. But for those who knew Laurent and Gabriel, the focus was personal. They were more than victims. They were sons, friends, scholars, with futures that should have been bright. Years later, the New Cross murders remain a wound that refuses to heal. Sunnex and Farmer are locked away, their lives reduced to the confines of prison cells. But the memory of Laurent and Gabrielle lingers, their faces preserved in photos and stories. The flat where they died has been renovated, its walls repainted, but the echoes of that night remained. This wasn't just a crime, it was a betrayal of trust, a violation of the promise that youth and ambition should be safe. As London moves forward, it carries their story, a reminder that even in a city of millions, darkness can find its way in. Part 4. The Flat of Fury. Ishan, Singapore, September 18th, 2008. In the orderly, gleaming city of Ishan, Singapore, where skyscrapers tower and streets hum with disciplined efficiency, life moves with a rhythm of predictability. This affluent suburb, with its manicured parks and modern flats, was a haven for families and professionals, a place where crime seemed like a distant rumor. But on September 18th, 2008, the illusion of safety was shattered by a crime so vicious, so personal, that it would stain the city's pristine reputation. It's the story of Wang Shijian, a man whose rage turned a quiet flat into a scene of slaughter and the ripple effects that exposed the hidden tensions of a global city. Wang Shijian, 42, was an unassuming figure, a Chinese national who'd come to Singapore seeking a better life. He worked as a laborer, his days spent hauling goods in the city's bustling ports. He lived in a modest flat with his girlfriend Zhang Ming, 41, and her teenage daughter Fang Jinyu, 17. The flat was shared with another tenant, Yang Ji, 36, and her 15-year-old daughter, Yang Mei. To outsiders, they were just another group of migrant workers and their families, blending into Singapore's diverse tapestry. But beneath the surface, their lives were a pressure cooker of unspoken grievances, financial strain, and simmering resentments. On that fateful day, those tensions would erupt in a bloodbath that no one saw coming. It was a humid evening, the kind where the air clung to your skin and tempers frayed easily. The flat was quiet, its occupants going about their routines. Jiang was cooking dinner, the scent of soy and garlic drifting through the cramped space. Fang was in her room texting friends. Yang and her daughter were watching TV, their laughter a rare moment of lightness. Wang, however, was restless. He'd returned from work in a foul mood, his face dark with anger. For weeks, he'd been clashing with Zhang, their relationship strained by money troubles and his growing paranoia. He believed she was mocking him, undermining him, and worse, he suspected her of infidelity. These thoughts, whether grounded or imagined, had festered into a dangerous obsession. Around 7 p.m., the flat exploded into chaos. Neighbors heard screams, sharp and desperate, followed by the unmistakable sound of furniture crashing. Wang, consumed by a rage that had been building for months, had snapped. He grabbed a kitchen knife, its blade glinting under the fluorescent lights, and turned on Zhang. She had no chance to flee. He stabbed her repeatedly, her cries echoing through the thin walls as blood pooled on the linoleum floor. Fang, hearing her mother's screams, rushed into the kitchen only to meet the same fate. Wang's fury was indiscriminate, his knife finding her chest, her arms, her face. She collapsed beside her mother, her life draining away in seconds. Yang Jie, alerted by the commotion, tried to intervene, shouting for Wang to stop, but he was beyond reason. He turned on her, the knife slicing through her with terrifying precision. Yang fell, her body crumpling near the doorway. Her daughter, Yang Mei, ran to her mother's side, screaming for help. But Wang was relentless. He attacked the teenager, his blows less lethal but no less brutal. Yang Mei fought back, her hands clawing at him, but she was no match for his strength. She collapsed, gravely injured but alive, her breath shallow as she lay among the bodies. The massacre lasted mere minutes, but its aftermath would linger for years. Wang, his clothes soaked in blood, stood in the wreckage of the flat, the knife still in his hand. The silence was deafening, broken only by Yang Mei's faint whimpers. Neighbors, paralyzed by fear, had called the police, their voices trembling as they described the screams. When officers arrived, they were met with a scene straight from a nightmare. The flat was a slaughterhouse, blood splattered across walls, furniture overturned, and 3 women dead, Jiang Ming, Feng Jinu, and Yang Jie. Yang Mei, miraculously alive, was rushed to a hospital, her survival hanging by a thread. Wang made no attempt to flee. He sat on the floor, his gaze vacant as officers cuffed him. The knife lay beside him, its blade caked with blood. The police were stunned, not just by the brutality, but by the ordinariness of the man responsible. Wang wasn't a hardened criminal, not a monster in the traditional sense. He was a laborer, a partner, a man who'd lived among his victims. What had driven him to such a frenzy? The answer, as the investigation would reveal, was a toxic mix of personal grievances and a mind pushed to the breaking point. Detective Inspector Tan Wei, a seasoned officer with a reputation for unraveling complex cases, took charge. Tan was known for his methodical approach, but even he was shaken by the carnage. The crime scene told a story of uncontrolled rage, but Tan needed to understand the why. He began with Yang Mei, who, after days in intensive care, was stable enough to speak. Her account was harrowing. She described Wang's growing anger in the weeks leading up to the attack, his arguments with Jiang over money and trust. He'd accused Jiang of disrespecting him, of turning Feng against him. Yang Mei recalled his muttering, his pacing, his eyes wild with suspicion. On the night of the murders, she said, he'd been drinking, his temper flaring over a minor disagreement. That spark had ignited a firestorm. Tan's team dug into Wang's background, searching for clues to his motives. He'd come to Singapore 5 years earlier, leaving behind a struggling life in rural China. He worked long hours, sending money home to family, but the pressure of life in a fast-paced city had worn him down. His relationship with Jiang was volatile, marked by frequent fights. Friends described him as hardworking but prideful, quick to take offense. He'd clashed with Yang Jie too, resenting her presence in the flat, believing she judged him. These slights, real or perceived, had festered, feeding a narrative of betrayal that culminated in the attack. Forensic evidence painted a grim picture. The knife, a common kitchen tool, had been used with such force that its handle was cracked. Blood spatter analysis showed Wang had moved methodically between victims, pausing only to shift his target. Jiang had 22 stab wounds, Feng, 15, Yang Jie, 18. Yang Mei's injuries, though severe, suggested Wang's energy was waning by the time he reached her. The flat yielded no surprises. No hidden weapons, no signs of a planned attack. This was a crime of passion. Born in the heat of a moment, but its roots ran deep. The investigation also uncovered a troubling detail. Wang had a history of domestic disputes. Neighbors reported hearing arguments from the flat, some escalating to shouts and slammed doors. Jiang had confided in a friend that Wang was possessive, his jealousy flaring over small things. Yet she'd stayed, perhaps out of love, perhaps out of necessity. Singapore's migrant community, often living on the margins, faced unique pressures. Financial strain, isolation, the constant fear of deportation. These factors, Tan realized, had created a perfect storm, amplifying Wang's insecurities into something deadly. The trial, held in 2010, was a somber affair. Singapore's High Court was packed with reporters, community leaders, and members of the victims' families, many of whom had traveled from China. Wang sat in the dock, his head bowed, his once defiant demeanor replaced by resignation. The prosecution, led by a sharp-minded attorney, argued that Wang's actions were premeditated, pointing to his escalating anger and the deliberate choice to arm himself. They described the attack as a slaughter, emphasizing the vulnerability of the victims, a mother, a teenager, a friend, and a child who'd trusted him. The defense countered with a plea for leniency, painting Wang as a man broken by circumstance. They brought in a psychologist who testified to his fragile mental state, citing stress, cultural displacement, and untreated anger issues. They argued he'd acted in a momentary lapse, not a calculated plan, but the The evidence was damning. Yang Mei's testimony, delivered by a video from a hospital bed, was the trial's turning point. Her voice, weak but resolute, recounted the horror of watching her mother die, of feeling the knife herself. She described Wang's face twisted with rage as he struck again and again. The courtroom was silent, the weight of her words crushing. Singapore's legal system is unforgiving, and the death penalty loomed large. The judge, a stern figure known for his no-nonsense rulings, listened as both sides made their case. The prosecution leaned on the brutality of the crime, the loss of 3 lives and the near death of a 4th. The defense begged for mercy, citing Wang's lack of prior convictions and his remorse expressed in a tearful apology to the court. But remorse couldn't undo the carnage. On the final day, the judge delivered his verdict, guilty on 3 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. Wang was sentenced to death by hanging, a penalty reserved for the gravest crimes. The sentencing was met with mixed reactions. For the victims' families, it was justice, a small measure of closure for their unimaginable loss. Yang Mei, still recovering, wept as the verdict was read. Her survival, a testament to her strength, but a constant reminder of the horror. In Ishan, the Chinese migrant community mourned, grappling with the stigma the crime had cast on their tightly knit group. Some saw Wang as a cautionary tale, a man undone by the pressures of a foreign land. Others viewed him as a monster, his actions inexcusable regardless of context. The case sent shockwaves through Singapore, a nation proud of its low crime rate and strict laws. It sparked debates about domestic violence, particularly within migrant communities where support systems were scarce. Advocates called for better mental health resources, pointing to Wang's untreated anger as a warning sign. The government, sensitive to its image, vowed to strengthen outreach programs, ensuring workers had access to counseling and mediation. But for the residents of Ishan, the focus was local. The flat, clean and repainted, stood empty for months, its address whispered as a place of tragedy. Years later, the Ishan murders remain a dark chapter in Singapore's history. Wang was executed in 2011, his death quiet and unpublicized, as is the custom in the city-state. Yang Mei, now an adult, has rebuilt her life, though the scars, physical and emotional, will never fully fade. The families of Jiang Fong and Yang Ji carry their grief in silence, their loved ones reduced to memories. The case exposed the undercurrents of a city often seen as flawless, revealing the human cost of ambition, isolation, and unchecked rage. This wasn't just a crime, it was a fracture, a crack in the polished facade of a modern metropolis. Wang Shijian's name is rarely spoken now, but the echo of his actions lingers. A reminder that even in a city of order, chaos can erupt with a single spark. As Ishan moves forward, it carries the weight of that September night. A promise to listen, to see, to never let such fury rise again. Part 5, The House of Horrors. Parfield Gardens, Australia, December 7, 2008. In the quiet suburb of Parfield Gardens, Adelaide, Australia, where neatly trimmed lawns and friendly waves define daily life, the illusion of normalcy hid a secret so horrific it would scar the nation. This was a place where families thrived, where children played in the streets and neighbors trusted one another. But behind the closed doors of one unassuming house, a nightmare unfolded, unseen by those who passed by. On December 7, 2008, authorities would uncover a scene of unimaginable cruelty, a case that would come to be known as the House of Horrors. This is the story of 4 children who endured unthinkable abuse, and the systemic failures that allowed their suffering to go unnoticed for years. The house on Parfield Gardens was ordinary from the outside, a single-story brick home with a small garden and a faded mailbox. Inside lived Angela Smith, 32, and her partner Robert Jones, 35, along with Smith's 4 children, aged 2 to 7. To neighbors, they were just another family, perhaps a bit reclusive but unremarkable. Smith was a single mother who'd fallen on hard times, and Jones, a burly man with a quick temper, had moved in to help out. The children, 3 boys and a girl, were rarely seen outside, their absence chalked up to shyness or homeschooling. But the truth was far darker. That house wasn't a home, it was a prison, a place where innocence was systematically destroyed. The discovery began with a neighbor's unease. Mrs. Carter, an elderly woman living next door, had noticed things that didn't sit right. The children never played in the yard, never went to school. She'd hear cries at night, faint but persistent, muffled by the walls. The house itself was a mess, piles of trash in the backyard, windows covered with tattered curtains. She'd seen Smith and Jones arguing in the driveway, their voices laced with venom. Once, she'd glimpsed one of the boys, his face pale and gaunt, peering through a crack in the blinds. Something was wrong, she told her husband, but fear of overstepping kept her silent. Until that December morning, when a scream, sharp, desperate, pierced the quiet. Mrs. Carter called the police, her hands shaking as she described the sound. When officers arrived, they approached the house cautiously, unsure what to expect. The door was answered by Smith, her expression a mix of defiance and nervousness. She claimed everything was fine, that the scream was just a child throwing a tantrum. But the officers, trained to trust their instincts, insisted on entering. What they found would haunt them for the rest of their lives. The house was a cesspool of filth. Floors covered in grime, walls stained with mold, the air thick with the stench of decay. And there, in a back room, were the 4 children, their bodies so frail they looked like ghosts. The children, Liam, 7, Emma, 5, Noah, 4, and Jacob, 2, were emaciated, their skin stretched tight over protruding bones. Their clothes were rags, their hair matted with dirt. Bruises and burns marred their bodies, some fresh, others faded into scars. Their eyes, wide and hollow, held a fear that spoke of years of torment. The room they were kept in was bare, save for a single mattress crawling with lice. There was no food, no toys, no trace of the care children deserved. The officers, hardened by years on the job, fought back tears as they carried the children to safety, their small bodies light as air. Paramedics rushed the children to Adelaide's Women's and Children's Hospital, where doctors were stunned by their condition. They were severely malnourished, their growth stunted, their immune systems compromised. Liam, the eldest, weighed barely 30 pounds, his 7-year-old frame resembling that of a much younger child. Emma had cigarette burns on her arms. Noah's legs were covered in welts. And Jacob, the youngest, showed signs of untreated fracture. Medical exams revealed chronic abuse, broken bones that had healed improperly, infections left to fester, and psychological trauma so deep it would take years to unravel. Angela Smith and Robert Jones were arrested on the spot, charged with multiple counts of child abuse, neglect, and endangerment. The house was sealed off, forensic teams combing through the squalor for evidence. Detective Sarah Mitchell, a specialist in child welfare cases, took charge of the investigation. Mitchell was known for her compassion, but also her relentless pursuit of justice. She vowed to uncover how such horror had gone unnoticed in a community where neighbors prided themselves on looking out for one another. The answer, she would find, was a combination of cunning deception and systemic failure. The investigation revealed a chilling pattern of abuse stretching back years. Smith, the children's mother, had once been a loving parent, but her life had spiraled after meeting Jones. He was controlling, volatile, and quick to use his fists. Together, they'd created a regime of terror, isolating the children from the world. The kids were kept out of school, their absence explained with forged homeschooling documents. Doctors' visits were avoided, illnesses left untreated. Neighbors reported seeing Smith at the local shop, always alone, her demeanor withdrawn. Jones, meanwhile, was a looming presence, his temper keeping prying eyes at bay. The house itself was a testament to their cruelty. Investigators found padlocks on the children's bedroom door, ensuring they couldn't escape. Food was scarce, the pantry stocked with cheap canned goods while Smith and Jones ate takeout. The children were fed scraps, sometimes nothing at all, their hunger a tool of control. Physical punishment was routine. Belts, hot spoons, even lit cigarettes used to discipline them. The youngest, Jacob, had been burned for crying too loudly, his tiny body bearing the marks of their rage. Yet the abuse wasn't just physical. The children were denied love, comfort, or hope, their spirits broken by constant fear. Mitchell's team interviewed neighbors, social workers, and teachers, piecing together a timeline of missed opportunities. There had been warning signs, reports of strange noises, the children's absence from community events, Smith's evasive behavior. Child Protective Services had received 2 anonymous tips over the years, but both were dismissed after cursory visits. Smith was adept at manipulation, presenting a facade of a struggling but caring mother. Jones, intimidating and aggressive, discouraged further inquiries. The system, underfunded and overburdened, had failed to dig deeper, leaving the children trapped in a cycle of torment. The children's stories, shared through careful interviews with trauma specialists, were heartbreaking. Liam, the eldest, spoke of trying to protect his siblings, sneaking them bits of bread when he could. Emma described hiding under the mattress during Jones's rages, her small body trembling. Noah, barely able to form sentences, clung to a tattered blanket, his only source of comfort. Jacob, too young to articulate his pain, flinched at sudden movements, his trust shattered. Their accounts painted a picture of a life devoid of joy, where survival was a daily battle against hunger, pain, and fear. The trial, held in 2009 at the Adelaide Supreme Court, was a reckoning for Parfield Gardens. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with anger and grief. Smith and Jones sat in the dock, their faces impassive, as prosecutors laid out the evidence. Photos of the children's emaciated bodies were shown, each image drawing gasps from the gallery. Medical experts testified to the long-term damage, stunted growth, weakened bones, and psychological scars that might never heal. Social workers admitted their failures, their voices breaking as they described missed chances to intervene. The prosecution argued that Smith and Jones had acted with deliberate cruelty, their neglect and abuse a form of torture. They highlighted the locks, the starvation, the burns, painting a picture of a calculated campaign to break the children. The defense, grasping for leniency, claimed Smith was a victim of Jones's control, her actions driven by fear. Jones, they argued, was a product of his own troubled past, his violence a reflex rather than intent. But the evidence was overwhelming. The children's testimonies delivered via video to spare them the trauma of the courtroom were the final blow. Liam's quiet voice, recounting how he begged for food, left the jury in tears. The verdict was unanimous, guilty on all counts, including aggravated child abuse, neglect, and assault. The judge, his voice thick with emotion, called the case a stain on humanity. Smith and Jones were sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 25 years before parole eligibility. The ruling was met with muted relief. No sentence could undo the children's suffering, but it ensured their tormentors would pay. Outside the courthouse, protesters held signs demanding reform, their voices a chorus of outrage at a system that had failed so spectacularly. The aftermath was a turning point for South Australia. The House of Horrors case sparked a national outcry. With investigations into child welfare practices, new laws were passed mandating stricter oversight of homeschooling and faster responses to abuse reports. Funding for social services increased, though critics argued it was too little too late. The children, placed in foster care, began the slow process of healing. Liam, Emma, Noah, and Jacob received therapy, medical care, and the love they'd been denied. Their foster parents reported small victories. Emma's first smile, Noah's first full sentence. But the road to recovery was long. Parfield Gardens was forever changed. The house was demolished, replaced by a community garden, a symbol of renewal. But the memory of what happened lingered, a shadow over the suburb's sunny streets. Neighbors grappled with guilt, wondering how they'd missed the signs. Mrs. Carter, the woman who called the police, became a local advocate, speaking out about the importance of vigilance. The case became a touchstone for discussions about child protection, exposing the gaps in a system meant to safeguard the vulnerable. Years later, the Parfield Gardens case remains a wound that hasn't fully healed. The children, now teenagers and young adults, carry the scars of their past, but they've shown remarkable resilience. Liam dreams of becoming a doctor, inspired by the medics who saved him. Emma writes poetry, her words a quiet rebellion against her pain. Noah and Jacob, still in school, are learning to trust again, their laughter a fragile but hopeful sound. Smith and Jones remain behind bars, their names synonymous with cruelty. No, this wasn't just a crime, it was a betrayal of the most sacred trust, a failure of a community and a system to protect its youngest. The house on Parfield Gardens is gone, but its lessons endure, a stark reminder that evil can hide in plain sight and that the smallest voices must be heard before it's too late. Part 6, The Phantom Abduction, Boolarra, Australia, March 2008. In the sleepy coastal town of Boolarra, Australia, where the ocean whispers secrets and the stars burn bright against the velvet sky, life moved at a gentle pace. This was a place of surfboards and sunburns, where locals knew each other's stories and strangers were rare. But in March 2008, Ballara would become the stage for a crime so bizarre, so manipulative, that it would leave the town questioning the boundaries of trust and truth. This is a story of Julian Buchwald, a young man whose twisted game of deception ensnared his girlfriend, baffled authorities, and revealed the chilling power of a mind bent on control. Julian Buchwald, 22, was a charismatic figure in Ballara, a surfer with a quick smile and a knack for storytelling. He was the kind of person who could charm a room, his tales of adventure captivating friends at beach bonfires. His girlfriend, Carolyn Watson, 17, was his opposite, quiet, introspective, a high school senior with dreams of studying marine biology. They'd been together for a year, their relationship a whirlwind of passion and intensity. To outsiders, they were a perfect couple, their love a beacon in Ballara's close-knit community. But beneath Julian's charm lay a darker side, a need for control that would soon unravel in a scheme as audacious as it was cruel. It began on a warm March evening when Carolyn failed to return home from a study session. Her parents, worried but not yet panicked, called her friends, assuming she'd lost track of time. But as hours passed with no word, their concern turned to dread. They contacted Julian, who seemed distraught, claiming he hadn't seen her since the previous day. By midnight, the Watsons called the police, their voices trembling as they reported their daughter missing. Ballara, unaccustomed to such mysteries, rallied around the family, organizing search parties and plastering missing posters across town. Carolyn's face, her shy smile, her dark curls, became a haunting presence staring out from lampposts and shop windows. The case took a dramatic turn the next morning when Julian, too, vanished. His car was found abandoned on a remote stretch of highway, its doors open, the keys still in the ignition. Inside was a note scrawled in frantic handwriting. "They took us. Cult. Help." The word cult sent a chill through Ballara. Rumors of satanic groups had long swirled in rural Australia, urban legends fueled by late-night campfire tales. The police, led by Detective Constable Emma Hayes, a sharp-minded officer with a talent for spotting lies, launched a full-scale investigation. The note, the abandoned car, and the disappearance of two young people pointed to something sinister. A kidnapping, perhaps, or something even darker. Hayes assembled a task force, their mission urgent: find Julian and Carolyn before it was too late. Search teams scoured the rugged coastline, divers plunged into the ocean, and helicopters buzzed overhead scanning the dense bushland. The media descended on Ballara, turning the quiet town into a circus of speculation. Reporters spoke of a satanic cult, their stories feeding public hysteria. Locals whispered about strange lights in the woods, about outsiders seen in nearby towns. The Watsons clung to hope, their home a shrine of Carolyn's photos, while Julian's family pleaded for his safe return. But as days passed with no ransom demands, no bodies, and no credible leads, Hayes began to suspect the truth was closer to home. The investigation focused on the note, its cryptic message a puzzle. Forensic analysis revealed it was written in Julian's handwriting, the ink matching a pen found in his car. The mention of a cult was oddly specific, yet there was no evidence of such a group in the area. Hayes interviewed Julian's friends, who described his fascination with true crime podcasts and conspiracy theories. He'd often spun tales of secret societies, his eyes gleaming with excitement. Carolyn, they said, was more reserved, her devotion to Julian bordering on obsession. She'd follow him anywhere, they noted, even if it meant stepping into his wilder fantasies. On the sixth day, the case broke open. A hiker in the bushland near Ballara stumbled across a campsite, its contents strange and out of place. There were blankets, canned food, and a backpack containing Carolyn's school books and Julian's wallet. Nearby, hidden in a hollow tree, was a burner phone with a single contact, C. Police traced the phone's activity, discovering it had been used to send texts to an unknown number, messages that read like coded instructions. "Stay low, wait for signal." Campsite was fresh, its occupants gone. But the discovery shifted the investigation. This wasn't a random abduction, it was staged, and Julian was at the center of it. Hayes brought in a profiler who suggested Julian might be orchestrating a hoax, possibly to test Carolyn's loyalty or to gain attention. The idea seemed far-fetched, but the evidence was mounting. Receipts found in the backpack showed Julian had purchased camping supplies days before the disappearance, including the burner phone. CCTV footage from a nearby store captured him buying duct tape and rope, items that raised red flags. Hayes ordered a deeper dive into Julian's past, uncovering a history of manipulation. Former girlfriends described his controlling nature, his tendency to create dramas to keep them close. One recalled a prank where he'd faked a car accident to see how she'd react. The pieces were falling into place. Julian wasn't a victim. He was the architect. The search intensified, police now treating Julian as a suspect rather than a missing person. On the 7th day, a tip came from a farmer who'd seen 2 figures moving through his fields at dawn. Officers descended on the area, a remote stretch of scrubland miles from Boolarra. There, in an abandoned shed, they found Julian and Carolyn, alive but disheveled. Carolyn was shaken, her clothes torn, her eyes wide with fear. Julian, by contrast, was calm, almost defiant, insisting they'd been kidnapped by a cult and had only just escaped, but his story crumbled under scrutiny. There were no signs of restraint, no injuries consistent with the struggle. Carolyn's hesitation, her glances at Julian, told Hayes everything she needed to know. In interrogation, Carolyn's resolve broke first. Sobbing, she admitted the truth. There was no cult, no kidnapping. Julian had convinced her to run away with him, spinning a tale of a grand adventure to test her love. He'd planned every detail, the note, the abandoned car, the campsite, drawing inspiration from crime shows he'd binged. He told her it was a game, a way to prove their bond. But as days passed, she'd grown scared, realizing the gravity of his deception. Julian had kept her in the shed, refusing to let her leave, his control tightening with each passing hour. She'd wanted to go home, but fear his reaction kept her silent. Julian, faced with Carolyn's confession, tried to maintain his story, but the evidence was overwhelming. The burner phone, the receipts, the lack of any cult activity, it all pointed to him. Under pressure, he admitted to staging the ordeal, claiming it was just a test to see if Carolyn was worthy. His lack of remorse was chilling, his words laced with arrogance. He'd manipulated not just Carolyn, but an entire town, wasting resources and shattering trust. The police charged him with kidnapping, false imprisonment, and perverting the course of justice, a rare case where the crime was as much psychological as physical. The trial, held in 2009 at a regional court, was a spectacle of betrayal and disbelief. Boolarra's residents packed the courtroom, their faces a mix of anger and confusion. Carolyn testified via video, her voice trembling as she recounted Julian's manipulation. She described how he'd convinced her to lie, to hide, to play along with his fantasy. The prosecution painted Julian as a master manipulator, a young man whose need for control had endangered lives and traumatized the community. They presented the burner phone, the receipts, and the campsite evidence, each item a nail in his coffin. The defense argued that Julian's actions, while misguided, were not malicious. They brought in a psychologist who diagnosed him with narcissistic traits, suggesting his need for validation drove this scheme. They pleaded for leniency, citing his youth and lack of prior convictions. But the judge was unmoved. Julian's actions had caused real harm. Carolyn's trauma, the Watsons' anguish, the strain on Boolarra's resources. He was found guilty on all counts, sentenced to 7 years in prison, a harsh penalty meant to send a message. Deception, even without bloodshed, carries a heavy price. The verdict was a bittersweet relief for Boolarra. Carolyn, scarred by the ordeal, withdrew from public life, her dreams of marine biology put on hold as she sought therapy. Her family, once pillars of the community, moved away, unable to bear the whispers. Julian's family, too, faced ostracism, their son's charm now seen as a mask for something darker. The town itself was changed, its innocence tainted by the realization that evil could wear a familiar face. The shed, where Julian and Carolyn were found, became a local legend, a place kids dared each other to visit, its walls whispering of betrayal. The case sparked broader conversations about psychological manipulation and the dangers of charismatic control. Experts pointed to Julian's tactics, love bombing, isolation, gaslighting, as textbook signs of coercive behavior. Schools in Boolarra introduced programs to teach teens about healthy relationships. Hoping to prevent another such tragedy, the media, once eager to sensationalize the cult angle, faced criticism for fueling panic, prompting soul-searching about responsible reporting. Years later, the Boolarra abduction remains a cautionary tale, a story told to warn of the seductive power of manipulation. Julian, released after serving his sentence, vanished from public view, his charm no longer welcome in Boolarra. Carolyn, now in her late 20s, has rebuilt her life, though she carries the weight of those 6 days. The town has moved on, its beaches and sunsets as beautiful as ever, but the memory of Julian's game lingers, a shadow that darkens the brightest day. This wasn't just a crime, it was a violation of trust, a reminder that the most dangerous lies are the ones we want to believe. In Balara, where the ocean still whispers, the echo of Julian Buckwall's deception serves as a warning. Not every story is what it seems, and not every hero is who they claim to be. Part 7, The Island of Fear, Sulu, Philippines, June 2008. In the turquoise waters of the Sulu archipelago, where islands dot the horizon like scattered emeralds, the promise of paradise hides a darker reality. This remote corner of the Philippines, with its swaying palms and coral reefs, was a place of beauty, but also of peril, a stronghold of the Abu Sayyaf group, a militant faction known for its brutality. In June 2008, the daring pursuit of truth would lead a journalist and her crew into the heart of this danger, only to find themselves ensnared in a nightmare of captivity and terror. This is the story of Ces Dryland, a woman whose courage pushed the boundaries of journalism and the harrowing ordeal that tested the limits of survival. This Dryland, 39, was a veteran journalist with ABS-CBN, a fearless reporter whose work had exposed corruption and conflict across the Philippines. Known for her tenacity, she'd built a career diving into stories others shied away from. Her latest assignment was her most ambitious yet, an investigative piece on the Abu Sayyaf group, a terrorist organization notorious for kidnappings, bombings, and beheadings. The group, rooted in Sulu, had terrorized the region for years, their actions a grim counterpoint to the island's beauty. Just believed her reporting could shine a light on their operations, perhaps even pressure authorities to act. It was a noble goal, but one fraught with risk. Ces assembled a small team: cameraman Jamie Encarnacion, producer Maria Reyes, and local guide Arnel Vitor. They planned to infiltrate Sulu discreetly, posing as tourists to gather footage and interviews with locals affected by the group's violence. The plan was ambitious but perilous. Sulu was a no-go zone for outsiders, its jungles and villages under Abu Sayyaf's shadow. Ces knew the risks. She'd covered conflict zones before, but her drive to tell the story, to give voice to the voiceless, outweighed her fear. She told her editor she'd be cautious, but caution, as she'd soon learn, wasn't enough in a place where trust was a luxury. On June 8, 2008, Ces and her team arrived in Jolo, Sulu's main town, under the guise of eco-tourists. They carried hidden cameras, their cover story rehearsed, a documentary on the region's marine life. For the first day, things went smoothly. They filmed markets, chatted with fishermen, and gathered subtle insights into the group's influence, extortion rackets, fear-driven silence. Arnel, their guide, navigated the delicate balance of local customs, ensuring they didn't draw attention. But Sulu was a place where secrets didn't stay buried. By the second day, word of their presence had reached the wrong ears. It was late afternoon when it happened. The team was traveling in a rented van, heading to a remote village for an interview with a defector from Abu Sayyaf. The road was narrow, flanked by dense jungle, the air thick with humidity. Without warning, armed men emerged from the trees, their faces masked, their rifles gleaming. The van was surrounded in seconds, tires shot out, doors yanked open. Ces and her team were dragged out, their screams swallowed by the wilderness. The men, members of Abu Sayyaf, were swift and disciplined, their leader barking orders in a dialect Arnel recognized. They'd been tipped off, likely by a local seeking favor or reward. The team's cover was blown, their mission exposed. Bound and blindfolded, Ces, Jimmy, Maria, and Arnel were marched through the jungle, their captors silent but for occasional threats. The journey was grueling, hours of stumbling over roots, the heat oppressive, the fear suffocating. Ces, ever the journalist, tried to memorize details. The sound of waves, the rhythm of their captors' steps, the faint smell of smoke. She whispered to her team, urging them to stay strong, but her own heart pounded with dread. Abu Sayyaf was infamous for its treatment of hostages, ransoms demanded, execution staged for propaganda. The team was taken to a hidden camp, a cluster of huts deep in the jungle, where they were thrown into a makeshift cell, its walls of bamboo and wire. The next 9 days were a descent into hell. The captors, led by a man known only as Commander Khalid, interrogated them relentlessly. They knew Cez was a journalist, her work a threat to their operations. Khalid, a wiry figure with cold eyes, taunted her, waving her press ID like a trophy. He demanded she retract her stories, admit to spying for the government. Cez refused, her defiance earning her slaps and threats. Jimmy, the cameraman, was beaten for trying to shield Maria, his ribs cracked under the blows. Maria, the producer, struggled to stay composed, her prayers a quiet anchor. Arnell, the guide, bore the worst, his local ties making him a traitor in the group's eyes. He was tortured daily, his screams haunting the camp. The conditions were brutal. The team was given scraps of rice and murky water, their bodies weakening with each passing day. The cell was swelteringly unbearable, insects crawling over their skin. The stench of sweat and fear overwhelming. Sleep was impossible, the nights filled with the sounds of the jungle and the guards' laughter. Cez, despite her own terror, became the group's rock, whispering encouragement, reminding them of their families, their purpose. She clung to the hope of rescue, though the jungle felt like another world, far from help. The captors filmed propaganda videos, forcing the team to beg for their lives on camera, their words scripted to demand ransom from the Philippine government. Outside Sulu, the kidnapping sparked a frenzy. ABS-CBN broke the news, Cez's face plastered across screens, her reporting career now a liability. The Philippines was no stranger to Abu Sayyaf's tactics, but the targeting of a high-profile journalist was a bold escalation. The government, under pressure, launched a military operation, but Sulu's terrain, rugged, vast, and controlled by sympathetic locals, made it a needle in a haystack search. Negotiators worked back channels, offering money, concessions, anything to secure the team's release. Cez's family, gathered in Manila, pleaded for her safety, their anguish televised for a nation gripped by the drama. Inside the camp, the team's ordeal grew darker. Khalid's mood swings were unpredictable. One moment offering extra food, the next threatening execution. He fixated on Cez, her defiance both infuriating and intriguing. He'd sit outside their cell, recounting his own grievances against the government, as if seeking her approval. Cez played along, probing for information, hoping to buy time. She learned fragments of the group's operations, smuggling routes, local alliances. But each revelation came at a cost. The captors grew paranoid, accusing the team of plotting escape. Arnell, weakened by torture, was dragged away one night, his fate unknown, his absence a crushing blow. On the 9th day, a shift occurred. Gunfire erupted in the distance, the sound of military helicopters rattling the camp. The captors scrambled, their discipline fraying. Cez sensed an opportunity, whispering to Jimmy and Maria to be ready. As chaos engulfed the camp, a guard, distracted, left the cell door unlocked. Cez, summoning every ounce of courage, led the trio out, their bare feet silent on the dirt. They ran, the jungle a blur of green and shadow, their hearts pounding with the fear of recapture. Bullets whizzed past, but the darkness was their ally. After what felt like hours, they stumbled into a clearing, where soldiers from the Philippine Army spotted them, their uniforms a beacon of hope. The rescue was a miracle, but the scars were deep. Cez, Jimmy, and Maria were airlifted to Manila, their bodies frail, their minds fractured by trauma. Arnell, they learned, had been killed, his body later found in the jungle, a grim reminder of the cost of their mission. The military operation had disrupted the camp, but Khalid and most of his men escaped, melting back into Sulu's shadows. Cez's return was bittersweet. She was hailed as a hero, but the weight of Arnell's death and her own recklessness haunted her. She faced the media, her voice steady but her eyes hollow, admitting she'd underestimated the danger. Endangering her team in pursuit of a story. The trial was a formality. Abu Sayyaf operated beyond the reach of courts, their leaders untouchable in Sulu's lawless expanse. Instead, the focus turned to accountability. Cez editors at ABS-CBN faced scrutiny for approving the mission, their safety protocols deemed inadequate. The network introduced stricter guidelines mandating armed escorts and risk assessments for conflict zones. Cez, once a maverick, became an advocate for journalist safety. Her ordeal, she wrote a memoir detailing the 9 days, her words, a raw exploration of courage, guilt, and survival. Sulu remained a battleground, Abu Sayyaf's grip unbroken despite military efforts. The kidnapping galvanized public opinion, with protests demanding stronger action against the group. The government vowed reforms, but progress was slow, the archipelago's complexity a barrier to change. For Ballara's residents, the case was a distant but chilling reminder of the world's darker corners. Sesay's story, though, resonated globally, her face a symbol of the risks journalists take to uncover truth. Years later, the Sulu kidnapping lingers as a wound that hasn't fully healed. Ses, now in her 50s, has stepped back from frontline reporting, her focus on training young journalists to navigate danger with care. Jimmy and Maria, too, have moved on. Their bond with Ses unbreakable, forged in the crucible of those 9 days. Arnell's family mourns quietly, his sacrifice a footnote in a larger tragedy. Sulu's islands remain beautiful, their waters sparkling, but the shadow of Abu Sayyaf endures, a reminder that paradise can hide peril. This wasn't just a crime, it was a test of human resilience, a clash between truth and terror. Ches Dryland's courage illuminated the darkness, but at a cost that echoes still, a warning that some stories come with a price too steep to pay alone. Part 8, The Fallen Star, Las Vegas, Nevada, USA, September 13, 2007. In the glittering chaos of Las Vegas, where neon lights promise fortune and fame, the line between hero and villain is often blurred. This city of excess, built on dreams and desperation, has seen its share of rise and fall stories, but few as dramatic as that of O.J. Simpson. Once an NFL superstar, a charismatic actor, and a household name, Simpson's life had been a saga of triumphs and scandals. By September 2007, his legacy was already tainted by a controversial murder trial, but what unfolded in a nondescript hotel room would cement his fall from grace. This is the story of a man who believed he could reclaim his past, only to orchestrate a crime so brazen it would strip away the last vestiges of his myth. Orenthal James Simpson, 60, was a living legend, his name synonymous with gridiron glory. In the 1,977s, he dazzled as a running back for the Buffalo Bills, earning accolades and adoration. His charm carried him to Hollywood, where he starred in films and commercials, his smile a beacon of success. But in 1994, that image shattered when he was accused of murdering his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend, Ron Goldman. The trial, a media circus, ended in a polarizing acquittal, leaving Simpson free but forever shadowed by suspicion. By 2007, he was a pariah in many circles, living in Florida, his fortune dwindled, his reputation in tatters. Yet he clung to his past, convinced he could rewrite his story. The spark for the Vegas crime was a personal obsession. Simpson believed sports memorabilia dealers were profiting off items stolen from him. Trophies, signed footballs, mementos of his glory days. Among them were Alfred Beardsley and Bruce Furlong, two collectors who'd acquired pieces Simpson claimed as his own. To him, these items weren't just objects. They were fragments of a life he had lost, symbols of a time when the world cheered his name. When he learned Beardsley and Furlong were in Las Vegas showcasing his memorabilia at the Palace Station Hotel and Casino, Simpson saw a chance to take back what he believed was rightfully his, but his plan would spiral into a reckless act of hubris. Simpson didn't act alone. He assembled a crew of 5 men, a ragtag group of acquaintances and hangers-on, eager to bask in his fading starlight. There was Walter Alexander, a former golf buddy, Michael McClinton, a security guard with a shady past, Clarence Stewart, a loyal friend, Charles Ehrlich, a nightclub promoter, and Charles Cashmore, a last-minute recruit. Simpson pitched the plan as a simple retrieval mission. Confront the dealers, demand the items, and leave. No violence, no weapons, just a show of force. But in the pressure cooker of Vegas, where egos and desperation collide, nothing stays simple. On September 13, 2007, the plan came to life in room 1203 of the Palace Station, a faded casino off the Strip. Beardsley and Furlong were there, their memorabilia spread out for a potential buyer, unaware of the storm approaching. Simpson and his crew, fueled by adrenaline and bravado, stormed the room, their presence overwhelming in the cramped space. Simpson, his voice booming, demanded the items, accusing the dealers of theft. McClinton and Alexander brandished handguns, escalating the encounter from intimidation to armed robbery. Furlong, a longtime acquaintance of Simpson's, was stunned, pleading for calm, but the situation was spiraling. The confrontation lasted mere minutes, but was chaotic. Simpson's men rifled through the room, grabbing footballs, plaques, even unrelated items like a Joe Montana lithograph. Beardsley, terrified, cowered as guns were waved, his pleas ignored. Simpson, caught in the moment, barked orders, his charisma replaced by menace. The dealers were shoved, threatened, their fear palpable. Cashmore, the newest recruit, hesitated, sensing the plan had gone too far, but he followed through, swept up in the group's momentum. By the time they fled, they'd taken over $100,000, 0 cents worth of goods, leaving Beardsley and Fromong shaken but unharmed. The aftermath was a masterclass in self-destruction. Simpson, convinced he'd done nothing wrong, acted as if untouchable, returning to his hotel suite to party. But the dealers weren't silent. Fromong, betrayed by a man he'd once called a friend, called the police, his voice trembling with anger. Beardsley, meanwhile, contacted a memorabilia associate who tipped off the media. Within hours, Las Vegas Metro Police were on the case, their focus sharpened by Simpson's notoriety. The story broke nationally. Headlines screaming of the juice back in trouble, the irony inescapable. 13 years to the day after his murder, acquittal. Simpson was again in the spotlight for all the wrong reasons. Detective Andy Caldwell, a no-nonsense investigator, led the probe. He knew Simpson's history, the way his charm had swayed juries and public opinion. But this time, the evidence was damning. Fromong and Beardsley provided detailed accounts, their fear lending credibility. CCTV footage from the Palace station captured Simpson's crew entering and leaving. The face is clear. The real breakthrough came from within the group itself. Cashmore, uneasy about the guns, turned informant, spilling details of the plan. Even more incriminating was an audio recording, secretly made by a memorabilia dealer present in the room, capturing Simpson's voice, loud and commanding, as he orchestrated the heist. Police moved swiftly, arresting Simpson at his hotel on September 16. He was defiant, insisting he was reclaiming his property, that no crime had been committed. His accomplices were rounded up, their loyalty crumbling under pressure. Alexander and McClinton, facing gun charges, cut deals, agreeing to testify against Simpson. Stewart and Ehrlich, less cooperative, maintained their silence, but the evidence was stacking up. The stolen items were recovered from a storage unit, Simpson's fingerprints on several pieces. The audio played for investigators was chilling, Simpson's voice laced with authority, shouting, "Nobody leaves," as the dealers begged for mercy. The trial, held in 2008 at Clark County District Court, was a spectacle, a grim echo of Simpson's 1995 murder trial. Las Vegas buzzed with media, the courtroom packed with reporters, fans, and skeptics. Simpson, dressed in sharp suits, projected confidence, his legal team arguing he was a victim of circumstance, targeted for his fame. They claimed the confrontation was a misunderstanding, that the guns were unplanned, brought by overzealous accomplices. Simpson testified, his charisma on display, insisting he only wanted his belongings, that he'd never intended harm, but the jury, diverse and attentive, saw through the performance. The prosecution, led by a seasoned district attorney, was relentless. They played the audio, its raw intensity, silencing the courtroom. Fromong's testimony was particularly damning, his voice breaking as he described his fear, his betrayal by a man he'd trusted. Beardsley, more combative, painted Simpson as the ringleader, his ego driving the crime. The accomplices' statements, though self-serving, confirmed Simpson's role, detailing how he'd planned the operation, even joking about taking care of business. Forensic evidence, fingerprints, timelines, CCTV left no room for doubt. This wasn't a vigilante quest for justice. It was a robbery, armed and deliberate. The trial also reignited debates about Simpson's past. The shadow of the 1995 acquittal loomed large, with some jurors privately admitting it influenced their scrutiny. Prosecutors never mentioned the murders, but the subtext was unavoidable. This was a chance to hold Simpson accountable, to strip away the Teflon coating that had shielded him. The defense cried foul, accusing the state of bias, but the evidence spoke loud. After 13 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict: guilty on all counts, including armed robbery, kidnapping, and assault with a deadly weapon. The sentencing on December 5, 2008 was a moment of reckoning. Simpson, his face etched with disbelief, stood as the judge delivered a scathing rebuke, calling the crime a violent confrontation, driven by arrogance. He was sentenced to 33 years, with parole eligibility after 9, a term that ensured he'd spend his later years behind bars. His accomplices received lesser sentences, their cooperation sparing them harsher fates. The courtroom was silent as Simpson was led away, his head bowed, the weight of his fall finally undeniable. The verdict divided public opinion. To some, it was justice delayed, a belated punishment for a man who dodged accountability. To others, it was a vendetta, Simpson targeted for his past rather than the crime at hand. Las Vegas, ever the stage for drama, moved on quickly, its casinos and shows swallowing the story. But for those involved, the impact lingered. For Mong, scarred by the betrayal, retired from the memorabilia business, Beardsley, ever the opportunist, sold his story to tabloids. Simpson's family, particularly his children, grappled with the loss of a father already diminished by scandal. The case sparked broader conversations about fame and accountability. Simpson's trajectory from icon to outcast became a cautionary tale, a study in how hubris can unravel even the brightest stars. Legal analysts debated the sentence's severity, noting the kidnapping charge based on preventing the dealers from leaving was unusually harsh. Others pointed to the guns, the threats, the sheer audacity as justification. The trial also exposed the murky world of sports memorabilia, where greed and obsession often blurred ethical lines. Years later, the Palace Station robbery remains a footnote in Simpson's saga, yet it's a pivotal one. Released on parole in 2017, Simpson lives quietly in Las Vegas, his fame a relic. His name a punchline or a curse, depending on who you ask. The items he fought to reclaim sit in storage, their value diminished by the taint of his actions. For Las Vegas, the case is a fleeting memory, but it's a reminder that even in a city built on reinvention, some falls are too steep to recover from. This wasn't just a crime. It was a final act of defiance, a man clinging to a past that no longer existed, only to lose what little he had left. O.J. Simpson's story, played out in the neon glow of Vegas, warns us that the pursuit of glory can lead to shadows, and that even legends can become their own undoing. Part 9. The Village Rampage, Trik and Lipnica Gorja, Bosnia and Herzegovina. May 29, 2008. In the rolling hills of northwestern Bosnia and Herzegovina, where villages nestle among forests and time seems to move slowly, the communities of Trisic and Lipnica Gorja were havens of simplicity. These hamlets with their stone houses and winding dirt roads were places where neighbors shared bread and stories, where life was hard but predictable. But on May 29, 2008, a single man's descent into madness would transform these quiet villages into a killing ground, leaving 6 dead in a nation grappling with the fragility of the human mind. This is the story of Tomislav Petrovic, a man whose paranoia and pain erupted in a 25-minute rampage, and the aftermath that exposed the cracks in a society still healing from war. Tomislav Petrovic, 38, was a familiar face in Trisic, a man whose life had been shaped by the region's turbulent past. A veteran of the Bosnian War, he'd returned to his village in the 1990s, carrying scars both visible and hidden. Once a jovial figure, known for his skill as a carpenter, Petrovic had changed over the years. The war had left him with a fractured mind, his schizophrenia untreated, his paranoia growing like a weed. He lived alone in a small house, his only companions a legally owned CZ 7.62 pistol and the voices in his head. To his neighbors, he was eccentric but harmless, a man to be pitied rather than feared. They were wrong. The morning of May 29 began like any other in Trisic. The sun rose over the hills, casting a golden glow on fields where farmers tended crops. Petrovic, however, was restless. For weeks, he'd been spiraling, his delusions intensifying. He believed his neighbors were plotting against him, whispering lies, poisoning his food. His ex-wife Anna, who lived in Lipnica Gorja, had become a focal point of his rage. Her decision to leave him years earlier twisted into a narrative of betrayal. That morning, fueled by alcohol and his inner demons, Petrovic reached a breaking point. He grabbed his pistol, loaded it with a full magazine, and stepped into the daylight, his mind set on vengeance. The rampage began at 9:15 a.m. Petrovic walked through Trisic's main road, where a local bus was idling, its driver chatting with passengers. Without warning, he raised his pistol and fired through the window, killing the driver, Marko Jovic, with a single shot to the head. Screams erupted as passengers ducked, but Petrovic was methodical, stepping onto the bus and shooting 2 elderly women, Jelena Markovic and Sofia Petrovic, their bodies slumping in their seat. And the attack was swift, the villagers frozen in shock as Petrovic moved on, his face blank, his steps deliberate. They crossed into Lipnica Gorja, a short walk through fields, his pistol still warm. His next target was Anna's home, where she lived with her new partner, Ivan Radic. Petrovic kicked in the door, finding Anna in the kitchen. She had no time to scream before he shot her twice. her body collapsing onto the tiled floor. Ivan, hearing the shots, rushed in, only to be gunned down, a bullet piercing his chest. Petrovic lingered for a moment, his ex-wife's lifeless eyes staring back, then turned and walked out, the gun still in his hand. The village, now aware of the danger, was in chaos. Doors slamming shut, phones ringing with panic calls to police. Petrovic's final act was on a quiet street where he encountered Mirko Zoric, a neighbor who'd once tried to help him. Zoric, unaware of the earlier killings, called out, perhaps hoping to calm him. Petrovic responded with a single shot, killing Zoric instantly. A young woman, Elena Vukovic, witnessed the murder and fled, but Petrovic fired, wounding her in the leg. By now, his ammunition was nearly spent, his rampage slowing. At 9:40 a.m., just 25 minutes after it began, Petrovic stopped, dropping his pistol in the dirt. He sat on a bench, his hands trembling, as villagers armed with farm tools surrounded him, their fear mixed with rage. Police arrived moments later, cuffing him without resistance, his eyes distant, his mind elsewhere. The scene left behind was one of devastation. 6 people were dead. Marko Jovic, 52, Jolina Markovic, 67, Sofia Petrovic, 71, Anna Petrovic, 36, Ivan Radic, 40, and Mirko Zoric, 45. Elena Vukovic, 22, was rushed to a hospital, her survival a small miracle amid the carnage. The villages, with a combined population of barely 800, were shattered, their sense of safety obliterated. Blood-stained, the bus, the kitchen, the street, each death a wound to the community's soul. Police secured the area, their faces grim as they collected shell casings and photographed the bodies, the weight of the tragedy sinking in. Inspector Luka Novak, a seasoned officer from nearby Banga Luka, led the investigation. Novak was no stranger to violence, having worked through the war's aftermath, but this was different. A single man, not a militia, had torn apart 2 villages. Petrovic was taken to a holding cell, his demeanor eerily calm. In interrogation, he spoke haltingly, his words a jumble of paranoia and regret. He described voices urging him to act, accusing his neighbors of conspiring to destroy him. Anna, he said, had deserved it, her betrayal, the root of his pain. Novak, trained to spot mental illness, recognized the signs of schizophrenia, but the law demanded accountability, and Petrovic's actions were deliberate, his weapon chosen with care. The investigation uncovered a troubling portrait of neglect. Petrovic's mental health had deteriorated for years. His symptoms noticed but ignored. Neighbors recalled his rants, his accusations, his habit of pacing at night, muttering to himself. His family, estranged but aware of his condition, had tried to get him help, but Bosnia's mental health system, strained by post-war recovery, offered little support. A local doctor had prescribed sedatives, but Petrovic rarely took them, his distrust of authority deepening. His pistol, legally purchased during the war, had never been confiscated, despite his erratic behavior, a oversight that proved deadly. Forensic evidence was straightforward. The CZ 7.62 matched the bullets, Petrovic's fingerprints clear on the grip. Ballistics confirmed he'd fired 15 rounds, each shot precise, his military training evident. Witnesses described his methodical approach, his lack of hesitation, chilling details that undercut any claim of impulsivity. Elena Vukovic, recovering in hospital, provided a harrowing account, her voice steady as she recalled Petrovic's blank stare, his gun raised without a word. The community, reeling, demanded answers. How had a known risk been allowed to fester? Why hadn't his weapon been seized? The trial, held in 2009 at a regional court in Banja Luka, was a somber reckoning. The courtroom was packed with villagers, their grief palpable, their anger tempered by sorrow. Petrovic sat in the dock, his head bowed, his once sturdy frame diminished. The prosecution, led by a determined state attorney, argued that his mental illness didn't absolve him of responsibility. It detailed the rampage, victim by victim, emphasizing the premeditation. Petrovic had loaded his gun, chosen his targets, and acted with clarity. The defense, citing his schizophrenia, pleaded for a psychiatric evaluation, arguing he was not in control, his actions driven by delusions. Expert testimony was pivotal. A psychiatrist, after months of evaluation, confirmed Petrovic's schizophrenia. Noting his hallucinations and paranoid beliefs, he described the condition as a storm in the mind, capable of distorting reality. but acknowledged Petrovic's awareness of his actions, his ability to aim and reload. The court grappled with a moral dilemma: justice for the victims versus compassion for a man whose illness had been ignored. Families of the deceased, their voices breaking, demanded punishment, their loss too raw for mercy. Anna's sister, speaking for many, called Petrovic a monster, illness or not. And the judge, a veteran of war crime trials, faced an impossible task. Bosnia's legal system allowed for psychiatric commitment in lieu of prison for the mentally ill, but the scale of the crime demanded accountability. After weeks of deliberation, Petrovic was found guilty, but deemed unfit for a traditional sentence. He was committed to a high-security psychiatric hospital indefinitely, a ruling that balanced justice with the reality of his condition. The decision sparked debate. Some saw it as leniency, others as a step toward addressing mental health in the justice system. The villages of Chertsak and Lipnica Gorja were forever altered. Funerals drew hundreds, the church bells tolling for days. The bus where Jovic and the elderly women died was retired, its seats a silent memorial. Anna's home, cleaned but empty, became a place of pilgrimage, flowers left at the door. Mirko Zoric's family planted a tree in his honor, its branches a symbol of resilience. Elena Vukovic, scarred but strong, returned to her studies, her survival a quiet defiance of the tragedy. The rampage exposed Bosnia's struggles with mental health care. Advocates seized on the case, demanding better funding, more clinics, and stricter gun laws. The government promised reforms, but progress was slow. Rural areas like Tricik left with little support. The case also reignited memories of the war, when trauma was widespread, its effects lingering. In men like Petrovic, villagers once quick to dismiss his oddities questioned their silence, their failure to act. The community, bound by shared loss, rebuilt slowly, their trust in the world shaken. Years later, the Trek and Lipnica Gorja massacre remains a wound that hasn't fully healed. Petrovic, confined to a hospital, was a ghost in the village's memory, his name spoken in whispers. The families of the victims carry their grief quietly, their lives reshaped by a mourning of terror. Bosnia, still navigating its post-war identity, grapples with the lessons of the case: mental health, gun control, community vigilance. The hills are as beautiful as ever, the village is alive with new generations, but the echo of those 25 minutes lingers, a reminder that the mind's darkness can be as deadly as any weapon. This wasn't just a crime, it was a fracture, a mirror held up to a society's failures, a call to see the unseen before it's too late. In Trisica Lipnica Gorja, where the wind carries the past, Tomislav Petrovic's rampage warns that even in the quietest places, the storm can break without warning. Part 10, Kids for Cash, Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, USA, 2009. In the rolling hills of Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, where small towns cling to coal mining roots and families trust in the fairness of their institutions, a scandal of unimaginable scope would unravel the fabric of justice. This was a place where courthouses stood as pillars of integrity, where judges were revered as guardians of the law. But beneath the surface of this quiet community, a conspiracy was brewing, one that would exploit the most vulnerable, children, for profit. In 2009, the Kids for Cash scandal would expose two judges whose greed turned a juvenile justice system into a nightmare, shattering lives and igniting a national reckoning. This is the story of Michael Conahan and Mark Ciavera, men who traded justice for money and the children who paid the price. Luzerne County was a working-class heartland, its towns like Wilkesboro and Hazleton marked by resilience and pride. The juvenile court, presided over by Judge Mark Ciavarella, was seen as a last resort for troubled youth, a place to steer kids back on track. Ciavarella, 58, was a towering figure, his stern demeanor and tough-on-crime stance earning him respect. Michael Conahan, 56, a fellow judge and Ciavarella's longtime friend, worked in the shadows, handling administrative duties with quiet efficiency. Together they were the face of justice, trusted to uphold the law. But behind closed doors, they were orchestrating a scheme so brazen it would redefine corruption. The seeds of the scandal were planted in the early 2000s when Ciavarella and Conahan saw an opportunity in the growing trend of private prisons. Robert Powell, a local attorney, and Robert Miracle, a developer, approached them with a proposal: build a for-profit juvenile detention center, PA childcare, and fill it with kids. In exchange, the judges would receive kickbacks, millions in cash funneled through shell companies and hidden accounts. For Ciavarella, who'd campaigned on a zero-tolerance platform, the deal was a twisted win-win. He could lock up kids for minor offenses, burnish his tough image, and get rich. Conahan, more reserved but equally greedy, facilitated the logistics, ensuring the county's public juvenile facility was shuttered to funnel kids to the private one. The scheme was chillingly simple. Ciavarella would preside over juvenile cases, handing down harsh sentences for infractions as minor as truancy, shoplifting, or writing a prank note. Kids, often first-time offenders, were sent to PA Childcare or its sister facility, Western PA Childcare, for months or even years. Conahan greased the wheels, manipulating budgets and contracts to keep the money flowing. Between 2003 and 2008, they pocketed $2,600,000 cents, their bank account swelling as children's lives were upended. Parents, unaware of the conspiracy, trusted the system, believing their kids needed discipline. The truth was far uglier. The victims were countless, their stories heartbreaking. There was Hillary Transu, 17, who posted a satirical MySpace page mocking her school principal, sentenced to 3 months. Charlie Balasavage, 15, stole a scooter, locked up for a year. Sandy Fonzo's son, Edward Kenzakowski, 17, was caught with drug paraphernalia and sent away for months, his mental health crumbling. These kids, often unrepresented by lawyers, faced Ciavarella's wrath in brief hearings, some lasting mere minutes. He ignored pleas, dismissed mitigating factors, and sent them to detention centers where conditions were harsh. Overcrowded cells, inadequate schooling, and reports of abuse. The scheme might have continued indefinitely, but for a whistleblower's courage. In 2007, a court employee, disturbed by the pattern of harsh sentences, tipped off the FBI. Agents began investigating, their focus on Ciavarella's finances. They uncovered a trail of suspicious transactions, cash payments, luxury purchases, and offshore accounts linked to Powell and Merkel. Wiretaps captured damning conversations with Powell joking about keeping the beds filled. The public juvenile facility's closure, orchestrated by Conahan, was another red flag, its timing suspiciously aligned with PA Childcare's opening. By 2008, the net was tightening, though the judges remained oblivious, their arrogance blinding them to the danger. The scandal broke in January 2009 when federal prosecutors announced charges against Ciavarella and Conahan. The news stunned Luzerne County, its residents grappling with the betrayal. Parents who trusted the court were horrified, their children's punishments now revealed as a profit-driven sham. The FBI's evidence was overwhelming. Financial records, emails, and Powell's cooperation, secured through a plea deal, laid bare the conspiracy. Mersical, too, turned state's witness, admitting to paying the judges to secure construction contracts. The total haul, $2,600,000, was a staggering sum, each dollar tied to a child's suffering. The investigation uncovered the human toll. Over 4,000 juvenile cases handled by Ciavarella were flagged for review, with estimates suggesting up to 2,000 kids were wrongfully detained. Families shared stories of trauma, teens returning from detention withdrawn, depressed, or suicidal. Edward Kenzakowski, Sandy Fonzo's son, took his own life in 2010, his mother blaming the detention's toll. Hillary Transu, now an adult, spoke of lost opportunities, her college plans derailed. Charlie Balasavage's family described his nightmares, his trust in authority shattered. These weren't just statistics. They were lives, stolen for greed. The trials, held in 2011, were a national spectacle. Ciavarella, defiant to the end, pleaded not guilty, claiming his kickbacks were finder's fees unrelated to his rulings. His arrogance alienated the jury, who saw through his lies. Conahan, more pragmatic, took a plea deal, admitting to conspiracy and fraud. The courtroom was packed with victims' families, their anger palpable. Sandy Fonzo's outburst, calling Ciavarella a monster who'd killed her son, was a gut-wrenching moment. Her grief echoing the community's pain, prosecutors presented bank records, wiretaps, and Powell's testimony, painting a picture of calculated corruption. Ciavarella's defense leaned on his reputation, arguing he'd acted in the kids' best interests. His tough stance meant to deter crime. They downplayed the kickbacks, claiming they didn't influence his rulings, a claim debunked by the sheer volume of sentences. Conahan's team, with less to fight for, focused on his cooperation, hoping for leniency. But the evidence was ironclad. Chavarella was convicted on 12 of 39 counts, including racketeering and bribery, sentenced to 28 years in federal prison. Conahan, pleading guilty, received 17.5 years. Powell and Miracle, testifying against them, got lighter sentences, 18 months and 1 year, respectively. The sentencing was a moment of catharsis, but it couldn't undo the damage. The courtroom erupted in applause as Ciavarella was led away, his head bowed, his legacy in ruins. Families wept, their relief tempered by loss. The judge's fall sparked a broader reckoning. Pennsylvania's Supreme Court vacated thousands of Ciavarella sentences, offering relief to victims. Though many had already served their time, compensation funds were established, but no amount could restore stolen years. The scandal exposed the dangers of for-profit prisons, prompting calls for reform nationwide. Luzerne County was forever changed. The courthouse, once a symbol of trust, became a reminder of betrayal. Residents, ashamed but resilient, rallied for change, electing new judges and demanding transparency. The detention centers were closed, their beds emptied, their profits gone, families like the Transways and Bala Savages rebuilt, their stories fueling advocacy for juvenile justice reform. Sandy Fonzo became a vocal activist, her son's memory a driving. The case reshaped policy, with Pennsylvania tightening oversight of juvenile courts and banning judicial conflicts of interest. Nationally, Kids for Cash became a rallying cry, exposing the intersection of greed and power. Documentaries and books chronicled the scandal, keeping the victims' voices alive. The case highlighted systemic issues, over-incarceration, lack of legal representation for youth, and the profit motive in justice. It also underscored the resilience of communities. As Luzerne County fought to reclaim its identity, its people determined to ensure no child would suffer such betrayal again. Years later, the scandal remains a wound that hasn't fully healed. Ciavarella, now in his 70s, remains in prison. His appeals exhausted, his name synonymous with corruption. Conahan, serving his sentence, fades from memory, his role less public but no less damning. The victims, now adults, carry scars, some thriving, others struggling, but their courage in speaking out has left a legacy. Luzerne County, its hills still green, its town still proud, moves forward. But the echo of those courtroom gavel strikes lingers, a reminder of justice sold and lives broken. And this wasn't just a crime, it was a violation of the sacred trust between a system and its people, a betrayal that turned children into commodities. In Luzerne County, where the past is never far, the Kids for Cash scandal warns that power unchecked can destroy the innocent, and that justice, once lost, must be fought for with unrelenting resolve. Part 11. The Alley of Secrets, Taipei, Taiwan, April 16, 2010. In the bustling metropolis of Taipei, where neon signs flicker and night markets pulse with life, the promise of opportunity often masks a darker undercurrent. This city, a blend of tradition and modernity, was a place where ambition thrived, but so did secrets, hidden in the shadows of its crowded streets. On April 16, 2010, a quiet alley in the Xinyi district would become the stage for a murder so precise, so calculated, that it would unravel a web of greed, betrayal, and power. This is the story of Lin Huayang, a businessman whose life ended with a single cut, and the investigation that revealed a truth far more elusive than the killer's blade. Lin Huayang, 45, was a titan in Taipei's real estate world, a man whose sharp mind and ruthless tactics had built an empire of high-rises and luxury condos. Known for his charm and cunning, Lin was a fixture in the city's elite circles, his name synonymous with wealth. But success came at a cost. His deals were often contentious, his methods skirting the edge of legality. Rumors swirled of ties to organized crime, of debts unpaid and enemies made. Lin, undeterred, lived boldly. Lavish parties, a sleek penthouse, a string of mistresses. Yet on that April night, his world would collapse in a narrow alley, his blood pooling beneath the city's restless glow. It was just after midnight when a street vendor, packing up his noodle stall, heard a muffled cry. Peering into the alley, he saw a figure slumped against a dumpster, a dark stain spreading across the pavement. He called the police, his voice shaky, unaware he'd stumbled onto a crime that would grip Taipei. Officers arrived to find Lin Huayang, his throat slit with surgical precision. The wound so clean it spoke of skill. His tailored suit was soaked in blood, his Rolex glinting under the alley's dim light. There was no sign of a struggle, no wallet or phone missing. A targeted hit, but not a robbery gone wrong. The scene was chilling, its efficiency suggesting a professional at work. Detective Huang Junwei, a veteran with Taipei's Criminal Investigation Bureau, took charge. Huang, known for his dogged pursuit of truth, sensed this was no ordinary murder. Lin's status made him a lightning rod. His death could be personal, professional, or something deeper. The alley offered few clues. A single cigarette butt, its brand uncommon, and a partial shoe print in the dust. Surveillance cameras, abundant in Xinyi, were oddly unhelpful. The nearest ones had been disabled, their lenses spray-painted black. Huang's gut told him this was planned. The killer, someone who knew Lin's habits, his vulnerabilities. The investigation began with Lin's life, a maze of allies and enemies. His company, Wei Yang Properties, was a powerhouse, but recent deals had stirred controversy. A failed waterfront project had cost investors millions with whispers of fraud. Lin's partners, including a shadowy figure known as Mr. Chen, were rumored to have triad connections. Their patience with Lin's losses thinning, his personal life was equally fraught. His wife, Mei Ling, lived separately, their marriage a facade. His mistress, a young model named Clara, was demanding, her presence a source of gossip. Huang interviewed them all, their grief, or lack thereof, raising suspicions. Mei Ling, cold and composed, admitted she hadn't seen Lin in weeks, their lives divided by his ambition. She hinted at his dangerous friends but offered no names, her loyalty to wealth outweighing her candor. Clara, tearful but theatrical, claimed Lin was planning to leave Mei Ling, a motive Huang noted but doubted. Business associates were cagey, their answers rehearsed. Mr. Chen, tracked to a private club, was elusive, his smile masking a warning to back off. Wang's team dug into Lin's finances, uncovering debts to shadowy lenders, payments to offshore accounts, and a recent insurance policy naming Clara as beneficiary. The web was growing, but the killer remained a phantom. The break came from the cigarette butt. Forensic analysis identified it as a rare Chinese brand, sold only in select shops. Huang's team canvassed vendors, finding one who recalled a nervous man buying a pack days before the murder. Surveillance from the shop showed a figure in a hooded jacket, his face obscured, but his build distinct. Lean, average height, moving with purpose. The shoe print, matched to a high-end sneaker, suggested someone with means, not a common thug. Huang cross-referenced Lin's contacts, zeroing in on a name. Luo Jianhong, 32. A former employee fired by Lin for embezzlement. Luo had vanished after the dismissal, his resentment well documented. Luo was a ghost in Taipei's underworld, a man with a knack for staying under the radar. Huang's team tracked him to a seedy motel where they found his belongings. A pack of the same cigarettes, sneakers matching the print, and a burner phone with texts referencing a job. But Luo himself was gone. His firing by Lin, a motive wrapped in opportunity. The disabled cameras pointed to a larger operation, someone with resources, pooling strings. Huang leaned on informants, pressing Taipei's triads for whispers. A tip led to a warehouse where Luo was spotted, but when police raided it, they found only his body. A bullet in his skull, a clear message to silence loose ends. The case grew murkier. Luo's death suggested a cover-up, his role as the killer confirmed by DNA on the cigarette, but his employer still unknown. Huang revisited the surveillance blackout, tracing the paint used to a hardware store. Footage there showed a second man, older, heavy-set behind the cans. He matched descriptions of a fixer tied to Mr. Chen, a triad enforcer known as Fat Wu. Huang's team tailed Wu, catching him meeting Chen at a mahjong parlor. Wiretaps captured cryptic talk of cleaning up and the boss's orders, but nothing concrete enough for charges. Chen, insulated by layers of deniability, remained untouchable. Huang's focus shifted to Clara, whose insurance payout raised red flags. Under pressure, she admitted knowing Luo, claiming he'd approached her for dirt on Lin. She denied involvement in the murder, but her story cracked. She'd been in contact with Chen, her sponsor in Taipei's elite circles. Huang suspected a triangle. Chen, angered by Lin's losses, hired Luo to kill him, using Clara as bait to lure Lin to the alley. The precision of the hit, the silenced cameras, and Luo's execution all pointed to a professional job. Chen's triad muscle at work, but proving it was another matter. The trial, held in 2011, was a frustration wrapped in a victory. Luo, dead, was named the killer, his DNA and possessions tying him to the scene. Prosecutors built a case around his motive, revenge for his firing, and opportunity, supported by this cigarette and shoe print. But the mastermind remained elusive. Chen and Wu were charged with conspiracy, but evidence was thin, wiretaps deemed admissible, witnesses too scared to testify. Both walked free, their smiles mocking Huang's efforts. Clara, charged as an accessory, took a plea deal, serving 2 years for withholding information. The courtroom, packed with Lin's associates, was tense, the air thick with unspoken threats. Lin's murder sent ripples through Taipei. His company collapsed, investors scrambling to salvage losses. Mei Ling inherited his estate, retreating to Hong Kong, her silence a shield. The Xinyi Alley, clean but stained in memory, became a whispered landmark, a cautionary tale for Taipei's ambitious. The case exposed the city's underbelly, triad influence, corrupt deals, the cost of crossing the wrong people. Huang, haunted by the loose ends, pushed for reforms, advocating for better surveillance and witness protection. His work led to small victories, tighter regulations on private security firms tied to triads. But Chun's empire endured, a shadow over the city. The public was divided. Some saw Lin as a victim of his own greed, his shady deals inviting retribution. Others mourned him as a visionary, his flaws outweighed by his contributions to Taipei's skyline. The media, sensing a blockbuster, spun tales of the real estate king's downfall. But the truth was less glamorous. A man caught in a machine bigger than himself. His death a transaction in a world where loyalty was a currency. The case sparked debates about organized crime with calls for crackdowns, though Taipei's elite, complicit in the system, resisted change. Years later, the murder of Lin Wei Yang remains a puzzle with missing pieces. Huang, now retired, still believes Chen was the architect, his untouchability a bitter pill. Clara, free but ostracized, lives quietly, her modeling days over. The alley, now lined with upscale cafes, bears no trace of the crime, but locals avoid it at night, their unease a silent tribute. Taipei, ever vibrant, moves forward. Its skyscrapers taller, its secrets deeper. The case is a footnote in the city's history, but for those who know the story, it's a warning. Ambition can blind, and in the shadows of power, a single cut can end everything. This wasn't just a crime. It was a glimpse into a world where wealth and betrayal dance a deadly waltz, where truth is a luxury few can afford. In Taipei, where lights never dim, Lin Wei Yang's death whispers that even the mightiest can fall, and that some secrets are buried too deep to unearth. Part 12, The Lost Child. Singapore, October 10, 2010. In the pristine streets of Singapore, where order reigns and safety is a promise, the disappearance of a child is a rarity that shakes the city to its core. The Pasir Panjang Wholesale Center, a bustling hub of commerce, was a place of routine, where vendors haggled and families shopped under the tropical sun. On October 10, 2010, this ordinary market would become the epicenter of a tragedy that would unravel the illusion of invulnerability, exposing the fragility of trust in a city that prided itself on control. This is the story of Huang Na, an 8-year-old girl whose light was snuffed out by a predator hiding in plain sight, in the investigation that revealed the devastating cost of misplaced faith. Huang Na was a spark of joy, a Chinese immigrant's daughter who'd come to Singapore with her mother, Huang Shuying, seeking a better life. At 8, she was bright and curious, her pigtails bouncing as she darted through the market, helping her mother's fruit stall or playing with other vendors' children. The Pasir Panjang Center was her playground, its maze of stalls a second home. Shooting, a single mother working long hours relied on the market's tight-knit community to watch over Na, trusting the familiar faces around her. Among them was Tuk Lung Hao, a 22-year-old vegetable packer, a quiet man whose unassuming demeanor masked a darkness no one suspected. That Sunday morning, Huang Na was her usual self, weaving through the market with a basket of oranges, her laughter a familiar sound. Shuying, busy with customers, last saw her around 10 a.m. waving as she ran to a nearby stall. When Na didn't return by noon, Shuying's worry grew. She searched the market, calling Na's name, her voice rising with panic. Vendors joined in, checking alleys and storage rooms, but there was no sign of the girl. By afternoon, Xu Ying contacted the police, her hands trembling as she described her daughter's pink dress and hairband. Singapore, unaccustomed to such mystery, mobilized swiftly, the case gripping a nation that viewed child abductions as unthinkable. Detective Alan Yin, a rising star in Singapore's Criminal Investigation Department, took charge. Yin, known for his meticulous approach, sensed the urgency every hour mattered in a missing child case. The market was cordoned off, its stalls searched, its workers questioned. CCTV footage showed Na skipping through the aisles at 10:15 a.m., but the cameras, limited in scope, lost her trail. Witnesses recalled seeing her near Tuk's vegetable stall, where she often stopped to chat. Tuk, interviewed early, was cooperative, his voice soft as he claimed he'd seen Na but didn't know where she'd gone. Yin noted his nervous fidgeting, a detail that lingered in his mind. The search for Huang Na became a national obsession. Volunteers flooded Pasir Panjang, combing parks, docks, and nearby estates. Posters with Na's smiling face adorned MRT stations and bus stops, her image a haunting plea for answers. Xu Ying, devastated, appeared on television, her sobs tugging at Singapore's heartstrings. The police, under pressure, expanded their net, deploying divers to search the harbor and sniffer dogs to scour the market's perimeter. Tips poured in, sightings, theories, even ransom demands, but none panned out. Yin's team worked around the clock, their hope fading with each passing day, the fear of a grim outcome growing. A week into the search, a breakthrough emerged. A vendor, reluctant at first, mentioned Tuk's odd behavior the day Na vanished. He'd left his stall abruptly, returning later with dirt on his clothes, his usual calm replaced by agitation. Yin's team zeroed in, re-interviewing Tuk. Under pressure, his story shifted. He admitted playing with Na that morning, claiming she'd left to find her mother. But inconsistencies piled up. His timeline didn't match CCTV, and a co-worker recalled him carrying a heavy sack to a storage room, a task he rarely did. Yin ordered a search of Tuk's belongings, uncovering a chilling clue. Na's hairband, its pink fabric, unmistakable, hidden in his locker. Tuk's arrest was swift, the market buzzing with shock as he was led away in cuffs. In interrogation, he maintained his innocence, his eyes darting, his hands clenching. Yin, trained to spot lies, leaned hard, presenting the hairband and CCTV stills. After hours, Tuk's facade cracked. Sobbing, he confessed, his words a descent into horror. He'd lured Na to a storage room, promising a game, but his intentions were far darker. When she resisted, his anger erupted, and he strangled her, her small body crumpling in his hands. Panicked, he hid her in a cardboard box, later moving her to Telok Blangah Hill Park, a nearby green space where he dumped her under brush. The police, guided by Tuk's confession, found Huang Na's body on October 23, 13 days after her disappearance. She was wrapped in plastic, her dress torn, her face peaceful but pale. The autopsy confirmed strangulation, with signs of a struggle, bruises on her arms, a broken nail where she'd fought back. The market, once a place of community, was now a crime scene. Its vendors grappling with guilt for trusting Tuk. Xu Ying collapsed at the news, her world shattered, her trust in Singapore's safety betrayed. The nation mourned, candlelight vigils lighting up the city, Na's name a symbol of innocence lost. Ying's investigation dug into Tuk's past, revealing a troubling profile. A Malaysian immigrant, he'd come to Singapore for work, his quiet demeanor hiding a history of isolation. Co-workers described his fixation on Na, his playful interactions with her masking an unhealthy obsession. Psychological evaluations suggested repressed impulses, triggered by stress or rejection. But Tuk had no prior record, his darkness invisible until it erupted. The storage room, searched thoroughly, yielded DNA, Na's blood on the floor, Tuk's fingerprints on the box. The case was airtight, but the why remained elusive, a void that haunted Yin. The trial, held in 2011 at Singapore's High Court, was a somber affair. The courtroom was packed, the air heavy with grief and anger. Tuk, his head bowed, pleaded guilty, sparing the need for a lengthy trial. Prosecutors detailed the crime, their voices steady as they described Na's final moments, her trust in Tuk weaponized against her. Xu Ying's testimony was gut-wrenching, her words a lament for her daughter and a plea for justice. The hairband, presented as evidence, drew gasps, its simplicity a stark contrast to the horror it represented. Tuk's confession read aloud was clinical, His remorse questionable, his motive reduced to a fleeting rage. Singapore's legal system, known for its severity, left little room for leniency. The defense argued Tuk's lack of premeditation, citing his confession and cooperation, but the judge was unmoved. Child murder carried a mandatory death penalty, and Tuk's actions, calculated in their concealment, brutal in their execution, sealed his fate. On November 3, 2011, he was sentenced to death by hanging. The ruling met with quiet nods from the gallery. Xu Ying, clutching Na's photo, wept, her relief overshadowed by loss. Tuk, expressionless, was led away, his life now measured in months. The execution, carried out in 2012, was swift and unpublicized, as is Singapore's custom. Tuk's death closed a chapter, but it couldn't heal the wounds. Hoang Na's murder shook Singapore, a nation that prided itself on safety. The Pasir Panjang Center, once vibrant, grew quieter, its vendors haunted by their failure to see Tuk's true nature. Xu Ying left Singapore, unable to bear the memories, her fruit stall taken over by another family. The park where Na's body was found became a place of pilgrimage, flowers left at its edge, a silent tribute to a girl who brought joy to all who knew her. The case sparked a reckoning. Singapore's government, stung by the breach in its safe image, tightened regulations on migrant workers, mandating background checks and community integration programs. Schools introduced safety campaigns, teaching children to recognize danger, even in familiar faces. The media, which had sensationalized the search, faced criticism for exploiting Xu Ying's grief, prompting soul-searching about ethical reporting. The public, meanwhile, grappled with the loss of innocence, their trust in the city's order shaken. Vigils for Na continued for years, her name a reminder of the vulnerability of the young. The investigation also highlighted systemic gaps. The market's lax oversight, its reliance on informal childcare, had left Na exposed. Yin, reflecting on the case, pushed for better community policing, advocating for cameras and patrols in public spaces. His work led to reforms, with Pasir Panjang installing more CCTV and vendors forming a safety network. But for Yin, the victory was hollow. Na's death was a failure he carried, a reminder that even the best systems can miss a predator hiding in plain sight. Years later, Hoang Na's murder remains a scar on Singapore's polished surface. The Pasir Panjang Center thrives again, its stalls busy, but Na's absence lingers, her laughter a memory vendors share in quiet moments. Xu Ying, now in China, lives for her daughter's legacy, funding scholarships in Na's name. His book's name is rarely spoken, his execution a footnote in a tragedy that belongs to Na. Singapore, ever forward-looking, has strengthened its defenses, but the case is a wound that time softens but never fully heals, a reminder that safety is a promise, not a guarantee. This wasn't just a crime, it was a betrayal of the deepest trust, a violation of a child's faith in the world around her. In Singapore, where order is king, Hoang Na's story warns that even the brightest places can harbor shadows, and that the loss of one small light can dim a city forever. Part 13, The Heist of Precision, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia, August 26, 2010. In the heart of Kuala Lumpur, where skyscrapers gleam and the city pulses with ambition, wealth flows like a river, guarded by systems meant to be impenetrable. The Maybank Tower, a beacon of Malaysia's economic might, housed one of the nation's most secure vaults, a fortress of steel and technology. On August 22, 2010, this bastion of safety would be breached in a heist so audacious, so meticulously planned, that it would redefine the limits of criminal ingenuity. This is the story of a crew led by a mastermind known only as the Architect, a theft that vanished into legend in the investigation that chased shadows across Southeast Asia's underworld. The Maybank Vault was no ordinary target. It held safe deposit boxes for Kuala Lumpur's elite tycoons, politicians, and diplomats, containing gold, jewels, cash, and secrets worth millions. Its security was state-of-the-art. Biometric scanners, laser grids, 24-hour guards, and a vault door that could withstand a missile strike. Breaching it seemed impossible, a fantasy for dreamers or fools. Yet someone had not only dreamed it, but executed it with surgical precision, walking away with over $20 million, 0 cents in loot, and leaving no trace. The heist wasn't just a crime. It was a statement, a middle finger to the systems that claimed invincibility. The theft was discovered at 6 a.m. when the morning shift arrived to find the vault's outer door ajar, its alarm silent. Inside, 47 safe deposit boxes had been emptied, their contents gone without a fingerprint, a fiver, or a frame of CCTV footage. The guards, stationed floors above, had noticed nothing, their logs showing a quiet night. The lasers, meant to detect any movement, were intact, their beams untriggered. The biometric scanners, requiring retina and fingerprint access, showed no unauthorized attempts. It was as if the vault had opened itself, handing its treasures to ghosts. Kuala Lumpur's police, stunned by the breach, knew they were facing a criminal mind unlike any before. Detective Inspector Razak Ismail, a veteran of Malaysia's special branch, was tasked with the case. Razak, known for his relentless pursuit of white-collar crime, understood the stakes. This wasn't just a theft, but a blow to Malaysia's financial reputation. The vault's clients, many with ties to the government, demanded answers, their fury matched by their secrecy about what they'd lost. Razak's first challenge was the scene itself, pristine, almost mocking in its cleanliness. The vault door's locking mechanism was untouched, its codes uncompromised. The only clue was a faint chemical residue on the floor, later identified as a rare solvent used to disable sensors. A hint of sophistication that pointed to an inside job or a genius outsider. Razak's team began with the bank's staff, interviewing guards, technicians, and managers. The head of security, a former military officer named Tan Wei, was cooperative but nervous, his alibi solid, but his knowledge of the vault systems intimate. The technicians responsible for maintaining the lasers and scanners were equally vetted, their backgrounds clean, but their access a potential weak point. Razak suspected a mole, someone who'd fed the thieves critical details. He also considered the clients. Could one have orchestrated the heist to cover a debt or claim insurance? The lack of transparency from the box owners citing private assets complicated the probe, their influence shielding them from scrutiny. The investigation widened to Kuala Lumpur's underworld, a labyrinth of smugglers, hackers, and mercenaries. Razak's informants whispered of the architect, a shadowy figure rumored to orchestrate high-stakes heists across Asia. No name, no face, just a reputation for flawless execution. The architect was said to assemble crews for one-off jobs, disbanding them after to avoid betrayal. His methods were legendary, exploiting technology, manipulating human error, and vanishing without a trace. Razak, intrigued but skeptical, chased the lead, knowing a figure this elusive would be nearly impossible to pin down. A break came from the chemical residue. The solvent, traced to a supplier in Singapore, was sold to a shell company linked to a Malaysian ex-con, Lim Chi Sang. Lim, 42, was a low-level fixer with a history of fencing stolen goods. Under surveillance, he was seen meeting a man in a Penang cafe, their conversation hushed but intense. The man, later identified as Vincent Ko, 38, was a former engineer with expertise in security systems. Ko's resume included contracts with banks, his knowledge of vault mechanics a perfect fit for the heist. Razak's team raided Lim's apartment, finding blueprints of the Maybank Tower and a burner phone with texts referencing the big job. Lim, caught off guard, cracked, admitting he'd supplied materials but claiming ignorance of the crew's leader. Ko was harder to track. A digital ghost, he'd erased his online presence, his last known address a vacant flat in Johor. Razak's team leaned on Lim, who revealed Ko's obsession with a big score to fund a new life abroad. The text on the burner phone mentioned a third figure, Boss, whose instructions were cryptic but authoritative. Razak suspected this was the architect, orchestrating from a distance. A tip led to a warehouse in Port Klang, where police found tools, diamond-tipped drills, thermal lances, suited for vault work. CCTV from the port showed Ko and an unknown woman, her face obscured, loading crates. The woman, dubbed the Ghost, became a new focus, her role unclear but vital. The investigation took Razak across borders, chasing leads in Singapore, Bangkok, and Jakarta. In Singapore, he uncovered a money trail, laundered cash moving through Hawala networks tied to the shell company. In Bangkok, an informant claimed the architect was a Malaysian expatriate living under an alias in Bali. In Jakarta, a stolen diamond from the heist surfaced at a black market auction. its buyer a triad-lunk dealer. Each clue deepened the mystery the crews reached, suggesting a network far beyond a single job. Razak's team built a profile of the architect, methodical, patient, likely ex-military or intelligence, with a knack for exploiting human greed and error. Back in Kuala Lumpur, pressure mounted. The government, embarrassed by the heist's audacity, demanded results, while Maybank's clients threatened lawsuits, their losses a mix of legitimate wealth and illicit gains. Razak focused on Ko, the linchpin. A sting operation in Penang caught him at a safe house, his laptop a treasure trove of plans, schematics of the vault, schedules of guard shifts, even a mock-up of the laser grid. Oh, defiant at first, turned informant under threat of life imprisonment. He described the crew: himself, Lim, the ghost, and 2 others, a lock-picker and a driver, all hired by the architect whom he'd never met, communicating only through encrypted messages. Ko's confession detailed the heist's brilliance. The crew had accessed the vault via a disused maintenance shaft, its entrance hidden in a basement utility room. The solvent disabled the lasers, applied with a sprayer to avoid tripping sensors. The biometric scanners were bypassed using a cloned retina scan, stolen from a bank technician bribed months earlier. The vault door, a marvel of engineering, was opened with a custom algorithm coded by Ko himself, exploiting a firmware flaw. The operation took 47 minutes, each move rehearsed to perfection. The loot was smuggled out in laundry carts, spirited away in a van that vanished into Kuala Lumpur's traffic. The ghost, Ko revealed, was Mei Lin, 34, a former gymnast turned cat burglar, her agility key to navigating the shaft. The lockpicker, a Thai named Somchai, and the driver, a local called Aslan, were hired muscle, their whereabouts unknown. The architect's identity remained a mystery, his messages routed through servers in Russia and deleted after reading. Ko's laptop yielded one final clue, a draft email mentioning Bali retirement, suggesting the architect's endgame. Razak, tantalized, sent a team to Bali, but the trail went cold. The villa rented under a false name, its occupant long gone. The trial, held in 2012 at Kuala Lumpur's High Court, was a partial victory. Ko and Lim, the only suspects in custody, faced charges of burglary, conspiracy, and money laundering. Prosecutors laid out the heist's intricacy, using Ko's laptop and Lim's testimony to paint a vivid picture. The courtroom, packed with journalists and bankers, buzzed with awe and outrage. Ko, remorseful but calculating, detailed his role, hoping for leniency. Lim, less cooperative, played the victim, claiming coercion. Maylin, Somchai, and Aslan remained at large, their Interpol warrants yielding no hits. The architect, a specter, was named but untouchable, his absence a taunt to the court. The judge, a stern figure, called the heist a crime against trust, its impact shaking Malaysia's financial core. Ko was sentenced to 12 years, Lim to 7, their cooperation sparing them harsher terms. The stolen goods, gold bars, gems, bearer bonds, were partially recovered from a triad stash in Hong Kong, but most vanished, likely laundered into cryptocurrency or black market sales. The architect's cut, estimated at $5 million 0 cents, was untraceable, his legend growing with each retelling. The trial's real punishment was symbolic. Maybank's reputation took a hit. Its vault no longer a fortress, its clients' secrets exposed. Kuala Lumpur re-grappled with the fallout. The heist became folklore, a tale of brilliance and betrayal told in bars and boardrooms. Maybank upgraded its security, installing AI-driven sensors and round-the-clock patrols, but the sting of vulnerability lingered. The government, under scrutiny, cracked down on triad networks, seizing assets and tightening banking laws. Razak, hailed as a hero but frustrated by the architect's escape, pushed for regional task forces to combat cross-border crime, his efforts leading to small busts but no mastermind. The public, fascinated, devoured documentaries and podcasts. The heist, a rare moment when the underdog outsmarted the system. The case exposed Malaysia's underbelly, corruptible insiders, porous borders, and the allure of quick wealth. It also highlighted the limits of justice, the architect's freedom, a reminder that some criminals are too clever to catch. Razak, nearing retirement, keeps a file on the case, his obsession a quiet vow to find the man who beat him, the Maybank Tower still standing tall, is a monument to ambition and arrogance, its vault now a fortress of lessons learned too late. Years later, the Maybank heist remains a legend, its details debated by criminologists and thrill seekers. Ko and Lim, paroled by 2020, live in obscurity, their names tied to a crime bigger than themselves. Mei Lin, Sumchai, and Aslan are ghosts, their fates unknown, perhaps thriving, perhaps dead. The architect, if alive, is a shadow. His Bali dream, a taunt to those who chased him. Kuala Lumpur, ever resilient, shines on, but the heist echo lingers, a whisper that even the strongest walls can fall to a mind sharp enough to find their flaws. This wasn't just a crime, it was a masterclass in audacity, a challenge to the systems we trust to protect us. In Kuala Lumpur, where wealth never sleeps, the Maybank heist warns that brilliance can be a blade, cutting through steel and certainty with equal ease. As the rain fades and the shadows deepen, we leave behind 13 stories that linger like ghosts in the night. From the unthinkable betrayal of a child's trust to the calculated brilliance of a vault breached, these tales remind us that darkness can wear many faces. Rage, greed, deception, or despair. They are not just crimes, but mirrors reflecting the choices that shape us and the consequences that haunt us. In Arizona's deserts, Singapore's markets, in Malaysia's towers, we've seen how fragile safety can be, how trust can be a weapon, and how justice, though sought, is not always found. These stories, etched in blood and time, are warnings to stay vigilant, to question the familiar, to listen to the whispers before they become screams. As you drift into sleep, let the rain carry these echoes away, but hold their lessons close. The past is never truly gone. It waits, watching, ready to teach us again. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the shadows. Until next time, this is Shadows of the Past, bidding you a restless good night.